right? Because today all the public infrastructure building happens in Bangalore, all the policy making happens in Delhi, all the money bags are in Bombay. If you don't get them on board, nothing will happen. So you have to bring all of them together, and you have to often do it without power, because you're not the government, you're not Reliance, you don't have the money of Reliance, but how do you bring all of them together? Power of ideas. That's the role of a Sutradhar, to express or to be able to influence even when you don't have control. And it takes effort, but it is doable. So that then brings us to this idea, can we build a AI ecosystem in India? And I am here to tell you that we will die trying as a country. Because look, today there is a circle of two. There are only two countries in that AI ecosystem. It's China and it's US. And we don't want this to become digital colonization again. And so therefore this is one of the most important things alongside climate and others that we have to engage with. So if we have to do that, what do we do? Ultimately, the ingredient for AI is data. So we have to unlock continental data sets. We have to be able to unlock data sets in a way that is safe, that is privacy preserving. I'll come to that in a minute. And so to do that, we need to build public tech. And there are two public techs that are coming, one from the government, which is, you will hear more about it. It's called IDP. It's a data platform, integrated data platform. And the second one that's come from iSpirit. The two are complementary to each other, and they will unlock data, continental data sets. Because only those countries, those companies, modeling companies will win. Think of a health modeling company. They'll win only if they have large data sets to train their models on. And the only place you can get large data sets is actually continental size data sets. Can you get large data sets in Middle East from Dubai? No. Singapore? No. Japan? Even no for that. So you need to be able to unlock the India size data sets. Europe is very lost. They don't know what to do. So I don't think they'll be able to do that quickly enough, sadly. And China is already doing it. US is already doing it. That leaves the burden on India. And I think we will do it too. And if we do it too, our approach will be very different from the US and the China approach. But if we are successful in doing it, then we create the ingredient for modeling to happen. Second, we must be able to actually mobilize compute and of course talent and capital for this to happen. Because this is something which is also very important, of which compute is a geopolitical issue. The compute comes mostly from American Silicon Valley companies, NVIDIA in particular, right? And US has very cleverly, and if we were US, we would have done the same, put it under the export control regime. So now, if we are in the good books of the US, we will have access to it. If you're not in the good books of US, we won't have access to it. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It is what it is. We have to plan for it. So there's a geopolitical element to this. Reliance has 4,000 GPUs from NVIDIA. But when will they get it? It's a year or so from now. Tata's has 4,000 GPUs. There's a VC firm, AI Foundry, which has about 3,000 GPUs. So it's a good start. We are starting to arrange for GPUs in a way that was not possible earlier, by using both the government and the private sector acting in concert. And we'll have to do much more of this as we go forward. The third is, we got to be disciplined about where to focus on. Now, one of these areas where we must focus on is health. Because it's not in all areas that we can win. I will give you, for example, a counterintuitive thing. There's a lot of effort that happens because it's very easy to understand. Can we create ChatGPT in local languages? And I'll tell you that's not a good area to focus on. Because who has most local language video content? It's YouTube. Who has most written content on, it's unfortunately WhatsApp and Facebook. So whatever open data that we unlock goes to them. And whatever is already with them stays with them, doesn't become available to an Indian entrepreneur. So an Indian entrepreneur will never have sufficient data to build models to compete with them. Health is not like that. Health in the US has HIPAA. HIPAA is very restrictive and therefore has not allowed continental data sets to be unlocked in the US for AI. So if we can move quickly on health, we will actually have the largest continental data sets on health, and therefore there is a possibility that Indian companies emerge as AI leaders, not because that's what their primary goal may be. Their primary goal may be to use Indian data for Indian models, for Indian patients and Indian citizens, but in doing so, they will create a byproduct that will also be relevant to the world. Can you believe that? So we must do challenge grants. I mentioned TB challenge grant. Where did that TB challenge grant happen? Who was the program manager for that TB challenge grant? Can somebody tell me here? Of course, dip in with that. The IKP was the TB challenge grant. Most successful challenge grant in the country. And with help and learnings from IKP, there's another one taking place which is to do with drones. That is also looks on a path of success. Can we now scale this out as we go forward? So we draw the attention of our entrepreneurs, not by asking them, but by drawing their attention through challenge grants, so that they focus on the right set of problems, winnable problems that we have. And last but not the least, and you can see whether it happens or not. This is a test, I think, for country. Can we be the first country in the world to create a holistic AI regulator? Because AI regulation actually has many dimensions. I've only listed 3. One dimension is to make sure that privacy is preserved, that the DPDP bill and MITI will do. Second dimension is that the users are protected, right? In the car that I came, that car has been crash tested. So by the government insists on a car testing so that the citizens are riding in somewhat safe cars. The food that we eat is labeled. The government insists on that label so that I can choose the right food that I eat. We need both testing and labeling for AI models to protect the users. That regulation has to come. Third is, we want fireflies lighting up the sky, not a few dominant companies doing this in India. So therefore, competition and monopolization is also important. If now a startup has to deal with 3 different regulators in AI, what do you think will be the result? Mayhem. Right? How do we know that? Because one of the things that India has brought to life is called the account aggregator. How many of you know about the account aggregator? It's about sharing of financial data. I see some hands going up. That's a FSDC regulation. All the financial regulators came together. But the practical implementation is, God knows, harrowing, messy. Even though it's an attempt, for the first attempt by SEBI, RBI, IRDA and PFRDA to do it together. They're well-meaning. They want to do it together. But in our world, doing things together inside the government is not in our DNA, is it? It's only siloization is in our DNA. I hope I'm not offending some of you. But this is the reality. So if we have to do this well, we have to break this cycle. And I can tell you, I would bet today there is a 60% chance that India will break this cycle. Because this realization is emerging that we must do something different. Doing more of the same is not the answer. And if you see this announcement in the next 6 months or so, make a bet on India becoming an AI ecosystem for the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharad. That was inspiring. If at all, one thing that all startups and all of us can take is take panga. Challenge the status quo. I think it's very important that we should do that, and it's a very inspiring talk that we had. Thank you again for that.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartuptv.
Right now, we are going into an exciting session, as we call it, in cricket terms, is the last half an hour before lunch. So I think it's a super exciting session that we have. And this has got stories of impact for a better planet. That's what we are calling it. I would like to invite the panelists. It'll be a panel discussion, exciting team that we have put together for this. And again, thank you all for coming here for this. The moderator for the panel will be Dr. Jayashree Ratnam. Dr. Ratnam, please come on stage. She is the Director of Wildlife Biology and Conservation Program for the National Center of Biological Sciences, NCBS. She started her journey as an ecologist at the Salim Ali School of Ecology in Pondicherry after doing what startups called a pivot from being a computer science engineer. So this is not the Friends pivot, it's a startup pivot. And then after that, she spent a year by studying captive monitor lizards at the Madras Cockerel Bank Trust in Mamallapuram. Then a PhD at Syracuse University, where she continued her training as a behavioral and evolutionary ecologist and conservation biologist, followed by tenures of research at the National Resource Ecology Labs, Colorado, and Colorado State University, and as a facilitator at the Earth Biosphere Institute at the University of Leeds. Her current research focuses on biophysical and anthropogenic drivers of tropical savanna and rangeland structure and function, forest savanna transition zones, and a long-term tree dynamics in the tropical forest communities. She is also a teacher interested in curriculum and program development at the graduate level. She teaches basic ecology and plant-animal interactions. Dr. Ratnam, please join us on stage. We would also take this opportunity to request the other change agents to come on stage. It's my privilege to call Nelson Vadaseri, co-founder and CTO of C6 Energy. He's an integrated MTech in biotechnology from IIT Madras. He started C6 Energy in 20... Sure, yeah. And, thank you, Nelson. We are looking at seaweed, which can potentially replace everything today, starting from crude oil. I would like to invite Dr. Sarika Gupta. There she is, right? She is an assistant professor. After 22 years in the academic, she said, let me do a startup for a cleaner and greener India. She would also talk about herself. I'd like to invite Rukmani Kapoor, Chief of Staff at GPS Renewable. She is an instrumentation engineer from Cummins College of Engineering and a Master in Engineering Business Management. Among other things, she's worked with non-profit sector with the Dalai Lama Fellowship and Teach for India. I'll leave it to you, Dr. Jayashree, for your talk, and then we get started.
This session here is going to be a little bit left of center for the audience here. So I'm going to start with a very short presentation on the Anthropocene. Sridhar asked me to talk about the Anthropocene and how we can make a better impact on the planet in this particular time that we are living through. And very quickly, we've all heard the word Anthropocene many times today. We've heard the words climate change and a number of other things. But what do they actually... So just in very technical terms, the Anthropocene is an epoch when human actions have left a signature on the geology of Earth. It's a time when human activities have changed fundamental Earth systems, its climate, water, and nutrient cycles. And it is a time when we have transformed terrestrial Earth, dramatically so in our subcontinent, where the human fingerprint is ancient and pervasive. And to give you a visual on that, here's a global map of Earth, and please follow it going from the bottom panel, which is in the 1700s, and up here to the 2000s. This is work by Ellis and Ramankuti, and basically from a number of, metrics, including the fossil record and a whole number of other data points, they have traced the history of Earth and the way land on Earth has transformed in the past 300 years. And as you can see, folks, please focus on the Indian subcontinent. The way we have transformed our part of the world is simply dramatic. We live here in India in one of the most transformed parts of the subcontinent. The human presence is deep, it is ancient, and in fact, even as recently as as far back as in 1700, we'd already begun the transformation. So the Anthropocene is of particular relevance in the Indian subcontinent because we have dramatically transformed every part of the subcontinent. And just to bear that in mind as we go forward and talk about the kind of solutions and the ways in which we can do better in the Anthropocene, a little bit more about what that looks like globally in numbers and maps. So actually today, the human footprint on Earth, if you measure it, from extent of built environments, lights, etc. So there's something called the Human Footprint Index. And if you take a look at that index, well, 75% of Earth's terrestrial lands on it you can measure the human footprint on it, okay? And once again, as you can see in this map, folks, the subcontinent where we live pops up. We've got a massive footprint by any measurable metric. Specifically, what does that look like when we think about, the food that we need to eat and what we do? Well, more land was converted to cropland in the 30 years after 1950 than in the 150 years between 1700 and 1850. Once again, to folks, take a look at the Indian subcontinent. Of course, there are other parts of the world as well, but I am focusing on the Indian subcontinent today. It's here that we are and here that we're going to matter. And what is dramatic about this transformation, folks? 3 of the most abundant plants on Earth, corn, wheat, and rice, that's it, meet 60% of human calorific needs. That is really a frightening statistic, and we should really be afraid of that because the climate is changing, and we don't know that these are going to remain viable crops into the future, so what are we going to do? And of course, crops don't grow on their own. When you grow crops, you throw fertilizers into earth. And once again, you will see here, since the 1950s, humans have doubled the amount of nitrogen and tripled the amount of phosphorus that is circulating in Earth's systems, right? And that's basically once we did the Haber-Bosch process and we learned how to fix nitrogen, that's the escalation you see there post the 1960s. And at the same time, similarly, with a number of phosphorus fertilizers and other things that we used, you can see the escalation in phosphorus. This is not trivial. Nitrogen and phosphorus are actually the most limiting nutrients on Earth for plant growth. And we have currently amplified them right across the subcontinent. And we all know what that means. That doesn't stay in the soil where you put it. It leaches out. It leaches out into Earth's waters, into the oceans. We all know about eutrophication of lakes and water bodies. And we know that this is basically spreading out way beyond where you put it on the land. This is a dramatic graph, and it's an amazing piece of work done by Baron et al. In 2018. If you think about the mammalian life on Earth, when we think about mammals, we love to think about all those fabulous mammals that are on our subcontinent, right? We think about the elephant, the tiger, the lion, and we dream of an Earth where all these amazing animals exist. But in fact, hand in hand with our transformation of land, we have completely transformed mammalian communities on Earth. 100,000 years ago, at the start of the Holocene, we had mostly wild mammals. But today, humans and livestock account for 96% of the total mammal biomass on Earth. That is how much we've transformed the natural world. And the biomass of domestic poultry actually is nearly threefold that of wild birds. So here's a very nice infographic that I found on that. That is what the mammalian community on Earth looks like today, folks. That little bar up there in green, that is wild mammals. This is what we've got on the planet. This is what we've got to feed. This is what we've got to work with in the coming decades. Obviously, if we have replaced everything on the planet, the global rate of natural extinctions have accelerated in the past 50 years. And, in the past 10,000 years, and just a quick graph. And one thing I want to point out to all of you is in all of these graphs you would have seen, basically there's a major acceleration in everything that we've been doing. Since 1900, and then further from 1950, all of these processes that are transforming Earth have literally exploded. Closer to home, and I have to say this because this is where we live, and it's going to be incredibly important. The monsoon, which is something that we really depend on as a lifeline of the subcontinent, has changed very dramatically in the past 40 to 50 years. And it's changed in a very particular way. If you look at that graph on the top of the panel there, you can see two things have happened. The gray line is precipitation per day. So actually, the average rainfall that we're getting on the monsoonal rainfall that we're getting on the subcontinent, it has gone down. But it hasn't just gone down, across the board. It's gone down, and at the same time, extreme events have gone up. So we're getting less rain on the whole, but on many given days, we are getting extreme rain events. And so the fundamental character of the monsoon has changed. It is characterized now by many extreme rainy days, and then even within the monsoon period, you'll get prolonged dry spells. So fundamentally, this template on which the plants and our crops and everything grow is changing, and we don't know in particular whether we can deal with these extreme events, yeah? And the other thing that's happened, which is really interesting, and that's also going to change the pattern of rainfall in the subcontinent, is that the Arabian Ocean, which for the longest time has been a cool ocean, has suddenly warmed. The Bay of Bengal was always warm. The Arabian Ocean was a cool sea. It has really warmed in recent years, as a consequence of which cyclone formations in the Arabian Sea have gone up 60%. So that is going to completely change the way rain comes onto the Indian subcontinent. So two big things that drive how much water we have in the subcontinent and how we do our agriculture and everything from there are changing in ways that we don't really know how to deal with. And just one last point. All of this has, I've been focusing on the agriculture because that's, of course, really important to our security. But something else that's really important is our natural ecosystems, natural earth. And, when all this is happening with the monsoon and the temperatures are going up, we all like to imagine that our forests, those beautiful rainforests, no matter we've protected only 5% of them on the subcontinent, they're going to be fine. But actually, recent data are telling us that that may not be the case. Across the tropical world, we are starting to see increased tree mortality, from the Amazon to Africa to everywhere, and they are attributing this mortality to increased droughts, which have become more frequent, which the trees can't handle. And interestingly, I have to tell you this data point. A recent study in the Western Ghats, my colleague who's measuring leaf temperatures in the canopy, and this was in Sirsi, which is an evergreen rainforest. Leaf temperatures in the canopy in some leaves measured 50 degrees centigrade. Lest we think that our forests are here forever, that may not be the case. Even what we have left, these kind of extreme temperatures can really threaten them. And we need to be asking ourselves then, if the world changes in ways that these ecosystems that we thought are our buffers against runaway climate change, if even they are threatened, what are we going to do? So, very quickly, in this turbulent, turbocharged Anthropocene, as I like to think of it, we're going to need to be very smart and thoughtful. Of course, it's all very gloomy, but I think we need to create and we need to find the solutions. And we've already talked a little bit about them in the talks that went before us, but obviously, to combat climate change, we need alternatives to fossil fuels, and of course, we need carbon capture. Compromised food security, well, we need drought and heat-resistant crops, alternatives to the current food crops, and alternatives to current animal protein dependence, perhaps. Compromised biodiversity, and the reason I put this up here is because I know that many people in this room think about energy and they think about food security. But biodiversity, by and large, gets a short rift, folks. There aren't enough people thinking about how to conserve the magnificent biodiversity of everything else on this earth. That's not us. And in this context, it has never been more important than it will be in the next decade for us to restore degraded natural ecosystems, connect the remaining protected areas that we have wherever possible. And this may be unusual, But given that we have only 5% of protected area in India, where's all that wildlife going to go? Where are our elephants, tigers, and other magnificent wildlife going to live? Most of them are going to be outside those protected areas. This means we need to imagine and design landscapes where humans and wildlife can coexist. It's not an easy challenge, but I really hope that people will take it up, because I think that has got to be the future design of human habitations. And with that, I want to take it to the panelists. Like I said, we need solutions, and the three people on our panel are all people who are in that space, who are thinking about solutions to the kind of problems the Anthropocene has posed. And I'll take it to them. Particular sort of problem, and try and find a solution for it.
Thank you, Jayashree. That was indeed a very scary presentation. You know, I've heard bits and pieces of that, but to see all that put together, 96% is just humans and livestock. If an alien were to come to this planet, they wouldn't even consider that 4%. They're like an exception. Well, but that's a very important exception for us, since we want to continue living on this planet. A bit about me. My name is Nelson Vadasheri, co-founder and CTO at C6 Energy. What we do at C6 Energy is farming the oceans for a carbon-negative feedstock from seaweeds. What does that mean, a carbon-negative feedstock? Essentially, and it was very interesting when I realized it, that everything around us is basically sunlight captured into hydrocarbons, and that is literally everything around us. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, this bottle over here, this table over here, everything is made from carbon. And a huge proportion of it is coming in from carbon-based feedstocks. The food we eat, of course, is from plants, which we grow. But most of the rest comes from fossil fuels like coal or crude oil, which it turns out is also plant material, but not from now, but from millions of years ago. And for me, my personal definition of sustainability is, can we live today with today's resources, not by borrowing from the past and not screwing up the future? So, all of us know that we should be using less fossil fuel, less crude oil. But today, if we were to just stop it, would we survive? No. There's so much of our economy, so many livelihoods which are based just on that. So we can't do that. We need all the solutions everyone was talking about today, and what everyone's working here are all needed. We need better sources of energy, even for feeds, even materials which we use crude oil for. We need a better source. We need alternative sources. And what we realized early on is, hey, if we wanted an alternative carbon-based feedstock to replace fossil fuels, the only route is to go down agriculture, because that is the only way to lock in, the sun's energy at scale. But when you look at India's agriculture or agricultural land, it is actually declining since the last 10 years. Or even more, 10 years is from FAO, and it shows up in the graph you showed there. What are we going to do? Our population is growing, and we're going to use the little land we have for fuel or materials. That isn't going to work. And that is when we said, hey, we have a lot of sea space, and all the nutrients which are flowing out from agriculture is going to the sea. Can we use these nutrients and the ocean space to actually grow something for the country? And when you asked about why we started, it started out because when we started in 2010, a lot of people were talking about land-based solutions. And why? Because perhaps in places like the US and China, they have a lot of land. Over here, we don't. I mean, the average land holding of a farmer must be an acre or less. And I was talking to this guy from Canada, and like, how much land does a farmer there have? And he was like, half a section. And I didn't even know what a section was. Like, how many of you know what a section is? Please raise your hands. None? That's a square mile. That's the size people are talking about. You can forget about it in India. And if you want to do something which has this scale, a planetary scale, right, a change at a planetary scale, we need that. And that's when we said, hey, can we farm the oceans? It started as a stupid question. Can we farm the oceans? I remember doing our final year projects back then, at that time. at IIT Madras. And we almost came to the conclusion that it couldn't happen. We were working on microalgae at that time, and we took some calls. And then we saw seaweed, which was really great. It was here's this plant, which grew really easily in the sea. And if you think about it, the way you grow it is, you take a piece of seaweed, you put it in the water, and it just absorbs carbon dioxide, absorbs these nutrients, and then becomes big, and then you harvest it. And it seemed so simple, and we were like, why isn't anyone doing this? Right? I mean, we don't have space on land, there's so much space on the ocean. Why isn't someone already doing this? And then we did a bit of Googling, and we figured that what was actually happening is that the kind of waters we have in India are very different from the waters we have in the temperate regions. And historically, where most of science and R&D has happened is in countries like, the US and China and Europe. I mean, that wasn't mentioned in an earlier presentation. And the stuff we have here does not grow in those waters. So, and if you look at, the tropical belt where this grows, we are like one of the most advanced countries in that space. So it was an opportunity ripe for the picking. And that's when we got in to basically set out to say, hey, can we farm something on the sea, not in like a few square meters, but on a square kilometer scale? And yeah, we're happy to say that we are actually setting up our first square kilometer farm in Indonesia as we speak to, farm these seaweeds at scale.
Great. Yeah, a great story. Yeah, it's so mesmerizing, and I think so that all the startups have something very hard and core in their heart that they take it forward. So myself, Sarika Gupta, I'm assistant professor at Banasli Vidyapeeth and director, co-founder at Greenathon Technologies Private Limited. And I'm very happy to be here at IKMC. I'm really thankful to the organizers and the team. So our story basically started that we've been doing research for more than 2 decades. So we were doing basic science and research and everything likewise. But in 2018, fortunately or unfortunately, we got an idea incubation support grant. From that, we started with our startup. And then we converted into our private limited, that is Greenathon Technologies Private Limited, in 2020. And we always thought of, as a microbiologist hardcore, I always find that there are so many problems what the industry are facing. And it is the responsibility of the academia or the academic research to solve those things. So we step in that whatever research we are doing from past 2 decades. So we're like, how can we do the translation of the product? So AIC Banasthali step in and they actually give a hand-holding support. An organization like IKP, we've been long associated with IKP, mentoring and all those things. So we like that we can bring it to reality. So now, presently, we are developing green technology industrial solutions for textile industry. And we have developed a patented technology that can basically detoxify and treat the textile industrial effluent, which is very high on dye and toxicants. And we guarantee 98.8% efficacy with any kind of processes that is in there. So we are very happy to be here, our aim is to zero waste management. So whatever water has been treated, 80 to 85% of the water has been upcycled by the same industry, wherein the solid biomass that has been generated, it is very high on metal content. So we are outsourcing it to electroplating industry. So we basically are contributing to the circular economy that we want. And with the intensive research, we are bang on with our product and its efficacy. And since last July, we have started the revenue operation. So whenever we were this smaller kid, I basically belongs to Jaipur, Rajasthan. We always see that the textile effluent being discharged in the water bodies and in the land pieces. So we always thought that can somebody step in and do likewise. Abhi hum itne bade ho gaye hain, abhi bhi the problems still persist. That means industry is not having any potential industrially feasible solution that a small-scale industry can also take care. So basically, our aim was to cater, because the larger players and the big players, they have to comply and they have to, they can afford that technology, wherein the small and unorganized player, they cannot do it. So we have developed an economically feasible, industrially feasible approach so that all the players in the textile ecosystem can afford. So this is how we go. Thank you.
So the story of GPS and how GPS started, GPS actually is a full stack biofuels company which works in biofuels, like what we mean by full stack is on all the layers of a biofuel project, which is technology, design and engineering, execution capabilities, R&D, software layers. So we work on all the layers of a biofuel project. But how we actually started, the two co-founders, Sri Krishna and Menak, actually started work. They were together in IIM Bangalore, and they both wanted to do something. They wanted to become entrepreneurs, but they didn't have like a eureka moment of saying, okay, this is what we want to do. So they joke around and said we kind of blind dated all the social issues in India, and there were a lot of social issues. But at that point of time in 2012, I think Bangalore was having a major urban waste problem, and it was being reported in papers every day. So they came together to see whether they could use technology to solve the urban waste problem, and that is how they landed in the biogas and the biofuel space. So biogas is not anything new. It is existing. It is what happens in our bodies. It is, you can dig a hole and make a biogas plant. But what GPS did was bring incremental innovations and how we can bring modular biogas plants in an urban setting. So our flagship project is called BioUrja, which is a captive biogas, modular biogas plant. There were incremental innovations like if you look at traditional biogas plants, they are cement-based, large plants that are not really monitored, they're not really financially viable. But the BioUrja plant is a vertically based plant that does not take a lot of space. So one of our clients, like JW Marriott, also has like the biogas plant is on 3 floors, they're decentralized. So that is a few incremental innovations they did. And then they continued to do innovations in terms of how do we monitor, because all the biogas plants need to be monitored continuously because it's a biological process, right? So if it breaks down, then what happens? So we continued making incremental innovations on remote monitoring system, applied some patents. But yeah, I think the major reason was that there was a problem at hand, and they both wanted to do technology for good, and that is how we started GPS Renewables. Currently, we are also, it started with the small scale plants, but currently we are executing large scale bio-CNG projects. We are executing a project with Reliance Bioenergy for converting paddy straw to bio-CNG. We are doing plans with Ever Enviro to convert the Indore municipal solid waste to bio-CNG. So that is a fully commissioned plant. It takes in 550 tons of municipal solid waste from Indore, which is around 80% of Indore's municipal waste, and converts it to 15 to 20 tons per day of bio-CNG, which fuels around 14 to 140 municipal buses, and also supplies gas to Avantika Gas. So that is the genesis of the company. Yeah, thank you.
Some simple questions for all of you, where I'm going to try and link the kind of stuff I do as an ecologist and what I study to the innovations that you're making. And so for you specifically, what is increased sea surface temperatures going to do to the potential for the farming that you've been talking about? I'd imagine the seaweed would be very sensitive to it.
It is sensitive, not as sensitive as coral, from a business, thankfully, but sadly for the coral. What we've seen is traditionally these seaweeds have been growing in shallow waters or in the intertidal zone. And conventional seaweed farming has been trying that. And we've been monitoring sea surface temperatures also. So it's not just data which we are seeing in other places, but stuff which we are seeing. And it's not that the temperature elevated all the time, but what's been happening, and it's just creepingly increasing. Every year the maximum temperature which is coming is just increasing, like maybe by half a degree. So, or a little bit, but it is steadily increasing. And when we started, for example, in near shore, we would, like a temperature of 32 degrees, 33 degrees would be high. Now 35 degrees is a regular occurrence. It's 2 degrees, which may not seem like much on land, but on the ocean that's dramatic. Because these organisms don't see the kind of fluctuations we see between night and day, and because the sea temperature is supposedly constant, but it is increasing. So what we are seeing is that, hey, we can move into deeper and deeper waters where the mixing of waters is better. So the effect of increased temperature is lesser. So that helps. Also, like what we said, we are working on breeding strategies to see how we can start selection and, breed development processes so you can get more temperature tolerant strains. So in that sense, I think we are well covered. But as someone who works with the ocean every day and sees this change, it's really sad to see the kind of things these changes are bringing. But it is what it is. We have to focus on bringing the change what we can do.
I just wanted to say, since you said that my presentation was very scary, that the point wasn't to be scary, but just to say that this is happening, and we need to keep it as the background template when we come up with solutions. And obviously, it's nice to see from your answer that that's something you're actively working towards, because you're seeing it and you're thinking about potential ways of reworking your model so that it can work within these new parameters of temperature and climate. Yeah, so that's great to hear. For you as well, any particular challenges that you're facing in scaling up what you're doing?
Basically, every time the bottlenecks changes, in the morning I had a discussion with Nelson. So the challenge is when we see that now we have accomplished a certain set of challenges, some new pop-ins. So the regulatory compliances and like in our case, because the thing is that there is no organization that certifies the product for the textile effluent treatment. So we have to work as per the guidelines given by MOEF, Ministry of Environment and Forest. So it goes, across, and with very fortunate fund from Tyrek Bayrak Thai winner and state government, we had the innovation award. So we have that awards, and so we have had a scale-up facility at a pilot scale in Jaipur itself. So challenges, we see that as we see the market expansion, so we have to see the diversity of the, process houses across. So we want to validate everything across the India in various textile hubs of the nation, and then we want to hit the global market. So as we expand and as we grow, so the challenges and the nature of the challenges keep on changing, but that keeps our energy level high, because that makes us strong, so that we are ready to face the next one to come. Yeah.
So I think the challenges for this sector are mainly, it's not a challenge, I think it's a good challenge to have, is the amount of feedstock that's available. So the feedstock that goes into the bio-CNG plant, whether it's paddy straw or other agriculture residues, the way that the feedstock works is there needs to be some kind of pre-treatment that needs to be done on the feedstock, and to break down the feedstock. So that it can go into the digester and become gas, right? Like that. Once we figure out the pre-treatment is what the remaining process for all the biomass, for all the input to the plant remains the same. So I think the challenge is to kind of develop technology, develop R&D onto the different kind of feedstocks available. Like there's paddy straw, there's soya, there's maize. So, and getting more players involved into this sector so that there is competition, there is more money coming in, and the R&D and the technology develops at a faster rate than what it is developing right now. That's where we are, yeah.
And I'd like to thank all our panelists very much. Thank you, Sarika, Rukmini, and Nelson for being here today, and for all the work that you folks are doing.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartuptv.
This plenary session, constrained as a source of creative possibilities, will delve into this through a fireside chat and a panel discussion. The topic of the fireside chat is responsible construction, creating a new paradigm. The construction industry is among the major sectors that contribute significantly towards emission of greenhouse gases, which have a major impact on the climate change, and is responsible for about 91% of overall greenhouse gases. 19% of overall greenhouse gases emission globally. While several countries have fixed their targets for zero carbon rating for new building construction, it is unclear how this will be achieved in India, where the average consumer is extremely cost sensitive and most likely unwilling to pay for an extra price for sustainable material and design. Under these constraints, how is the building industry viewing the problem and working out a solution? Let us hear about some of these complex issues from the conversation of two progressive architects, the fireside chat, Responsible Construction, Creating a New Paradigm. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Anjan Mitra and Dr. Vinod Gupta. Please, sir, come onto the stage. Anjan Mitra is a designer, an architect by passion, and a creative thinker in search for responsible design practices, a process that has taken him beyond the physicality of architecture to a holistic experience to build environment. This journey started with his design practice, The Appropriate Alternative, in 1992, and sustained over the last 3 decades. He believes that the most sustainable model of development is rooted in conservation and value addition and can be made possible through addition of responsible design practices. Dr. Vinod Gupta is alumnus of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and IIT Delhi, and from IIT Delhi. Dr. Vinod Gupta has been a teacher in architecture and industrial design at School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. He is partner in Space Design Consultants and CEO of Opus Indigo Designs Private Limited, Fellow of Indian Institute of Architects, member of Institute of Indian Interior Designers, founder members of Gubi Alliances for Sustainable Habitat, and founder member of Griha Council. So I welcome both of you, and we look forward to learning from you how we can do responsible construction. Thank you.
The current situation is scary. So I take that kind of take it from there and try and understand what is really the role of construction in kind of today's context and also a future ahead. If you really remember what Jesse has said, the kind of footfall change, the kind of built environment change, that has happened primarily of one human expression, and that is construction. Construction is something which is, I would say, is more of a displacement. It is an act which is basically a violent act. It kind of, the moment we conceive, we want to make a statement. So construction necessarily symbolizes a kind of an aggression into the local habitat, local flora, local fauna, ecology. In every part, that is the way of things that has happened. And this particular trend of construction has vastly changed from the construction practices that existed in the pre-industrial age. If you really recall anything in Hindu philosophy, it is that the human beings are considered as a part of a larger universe. There is a kind of a symbalance between the humans and the Prakriti, the nature, Mother Nature, in all its forms. So what happened is that every small little things that is being projected as a shelter or some other occupation, it was always conceived as a part of that whole system. The balance is an essential component, because if you are part of it, you always think of a balance. But things started changing when we kind of overlook into this, and then with the industrialization, suddenly the technology has started over, and it mainly challenged the one course, that we are not part of the nature. We are here to dominate nature. And that is a kind of an attitude which actually is manifested in construction. Roads, infrastructure, buildings, building typologies, everything changed. The way people interact also changes. So when we talk about construction, we have to really understand construction from this particular manner. Earlier, the building construction was a kind of a circular system. Everybody knows that it needs repair, it kind of comes back to the original cycle, so it's more of a cycle. Today, we have conceived construction almost like a project. So there is a starting point and then there is an end point. In fact, who is going to use it? There is no connection. So construction largely today, the way we see, is completely separated from the society as a whole. And this is very disruptive. So in this kind of a parameter, I think we have to really look at the construction as a whole, and that is how I find that the topic of this today is that responsible construction, because we are not taking any responsibilities as far as the construction is concerned. We always think sustainability is a concept. Sustainability is in the thinking process. Sustainability cannot be with a material until and unless it is like Mother Earth, which kind of has an automatic decay. Anything apart from that has a process of putting it together. I think in that kind of a scenario, I would ask Dr. Gupta to elaborate on this particular aspect of sustainability, because through his GRIA Council and his prolonged experience in this, that how really the modern construction is thinking about this.
When we talk about sustainable construction, we think of rating systems that define, how good that particular construction is, and we have what we call green buildings, high performance buildings, and the latest word that we are using for this is net zero buildings. Net zero means we don't import or export anything out of this. And the system that we have, first we define the goals. So the goal is really for us to have less greenhouse gas emissions, which is what this talk has been this morning. So we, and less energy use is one of the ways in which these greenhouse gas emissions are supposed to be taken care of. So the systems that we have for measuring this, and once we have our goals, and then we, process this, the building process that Anjan was talking about, and finally when the result is obtained, we can measure it in terms of LEED, which is an American system, and GRIA, which is modeled after LEED in some ways, and it defines what a good building ought to be. And ECBC, which is the Energy Conserving Building Code, which defines how much energy you may use in any particular building. So all of these, both of these systems of LEED and GRIA, they talk about energy use, water use, less waste to be generated and less pollution to be generated. But the main thing which they deal with is indoor air temperature and indoor air quality. That means what we are breathing inside the building should be good air and without pollutants, and we should all be comfortable and so on. So thermal comfort and indoor air quality is what it is about. And we have been making buildings, these rating systems came about 20 years back. In 2001, I think the first LEED building was built in India. I've been working with these kind of buildings for about 50 years. So what we have found is that we may achieve good efficiency through any of these systems, because they're basically talking about using more efficient air conditioning, more efficient insulation, and more efficient faucets in the toilets and so on. The question is whether our goal of using less energy is achieved. The answer is no. We have not not been able to do that, our energy use, water use and things, all of these have actually been increasing. And this is because of what we call the Jevons paradox, which is that as we improve efficiency, we tend to use that thing much more often. We see this most with cars. As cars, as our highway speed increases, it does not decrease the travel time because we travel further distances. If we have more efficient cars, it does not reduce our fuel consumption because we will use this more often. So if we keep in mind the ultimate aim that we have, which is to reduce this consumption and not simply to improve the efficiency, we will have to do something else. So my personal experience is that by making things more efficient, this does not change. But if you can change things in such a way that human behavior changes, that is the thing which makes it possible for us to achieve our objectives. I'll give you here examples of two university campuses which we have designed. One is for NIIT in Rajasthan, in Nimrana, and the other one is for IIT Gandhinagar, which is in Gujarat. Very similar kind of climate in a way. Rajasthan is probably a little bit drier. So what we did in Rajasthan was to use an evaporative cooling system, not install any air conditioning at all in the entire campus. Not allow any cars or motorcycles to be driven in the campus at all. All of them must be parked outside or near the entrance, and no air conditioning was allowed. So this, the university took great pride in this. And then they started talking about the students that don't worry about being slightly uncomfortable. You know, what is important is that you are living in a sustainable building or in a sustainable campus and so on. And this really changed the behavior. After we had finished the first set of buildings, somebody else came and the university decided no, they are not going to have air conditioning in any of the new buildings. Now, I'll compare this with what happens at IIT Gandhinagar. They were concerned, I mean, we planned this, the campus again with even more important principles, more important designs or different designs. But air conditioning was not taken out of the system, it was very much there. Except that they use a very efficient system of air conditioning. And the net result is that now they have air-conditioned hostels, air-conditioned laboratories, all the administrative buildings and everything is air-conditioned. It's not that the campus is bad, it's just that the goals which they were looking for were efficiency, and they wanted to provide the highest level of comfort for the elite students that they have in this campus. And they probably achieved this objective. But if we look at the objective from a larger perspective, which is a global perspective, and which is to reduce energy use in buildings, that does not seem to happen there. We have, much less use of water, perhaps in this, and I will talk about that a little more. Now, these systems that I talked about, which we use to measure how efficient our buildings are, most of these apply what is called a per square meter standard. Per square meter standard is how much energy do you consume in per square meter of the building space that you have built. Or, now we are not in a situation where our country has a set standard of how much space we can build. So the end result can be something like what we have, Mr. Ambani's house, where there are 4 residents, but they have 60,000 square meter of space. They have built the most efficient, energy conserving building or most environment friendly building that they could possibly build. But is this sustainable to have this kind of construction? No. the whole concept of sustainability is something which we need to define a little better in our own context. The European concept of sustainability given to us at the United Nations by the Brundtland Commission is that we are fighting with, or we are trying to save our future. But in India, we are fighting against each other. There are so many different sections in the society, and it is said that 1% of the top Indians control 50% of the wealth in this country. And the top 10% controls 75% of the wealth of the country. And if we take the bottom 50%, they have only 5% or so. So in this kind of a situation, any standard that we have which says 1 square meter, how much does it consume? It doesn't work for us. We have to look for our own solutions. And the only solution that I've found is that if we can, instead of thinking about efficiency, if we can think simply about changing human behavior, that is what will get us to come to a better situation.
We are having this making it possible seminar where in a completely artificial environment which doesn't justify itself. So this is a kind of a situation. There is no daylight, but there is plenty of daylight outside. And what we are striving for is a kind of a artificial comfort zone, and we are talking about sustainability in general terms. This is not done. I think we have to change our perceptions first. On one hand, as Dr. Gupta has amply identified, that human psychology is hunger. Hunger for comfort, hunger for status, hunger for so many other greeds. If that doesn't change, and your hunger for controlling others, if that is not going to change, obviously the construction industry which feeds this is definitely not going to change. And the kind of construction when we talk about 10% of actual constructions. 90% of these constructions are beyond our domain, which is where the mass of the built area is being defined. Who follows what kind of logic? So until and unless we change our perceptions about the construction that we are trying to do, is first we have to have that the overall concept that I am part of this nature. If I want to reverse that, the first thing is we have to change and make ourselves humble enough to understand that I am part of a system, I am not the system. So if we take that system in part, then the way we approach construction is making it purposeful. Why I am trying to do it. That's number one. Number two is whatever we include is displacement. Now construction is displacement in the large scale. You have urban redevelopment, which is a major large scale thoroughfare. We create huge scale infrastructure. The Uttarakhand and the Himachal Pradesh is reeling under, Sikkim is reeling under because of extensive landslides, because it completely destroys the ecology. In terms of tourism, in terms of economic boost, what we are trying to do is completely destabilize the culture. Now, this is something which is very, very erroneous. So, instead, if we just think that can we reverse this, now that reversal process has to include that first and foremost, can instead of displacement can be more accommodative. Earlier in the Indian system, we don't throw anything, all the waste taking from our kitchen to everything that we used to recycle, we used to reuse. If our clothes are torn, we just mend it up and use it for that matter. The old things we kind of stitch it, like our grandmother's heritage and other thing, we re-stitch, we actually wear it with the greater elan. Where is that system gone? So we don't have any respect for what we have. We are talking about heritage. We don't understand heritage. Because our heritage is the way we connect with the nature, the way we connect with the people, the way we connect with the society is completely gone. So if we kind of just reverse this back, then we don't look at our old things in the similar manner. Instead of development, Because the inner city cannot be developed, what we are doing is infringing on the farmlands and the marginal. Our development has become essentially marginal. By doing that, we are creating more kind of road infrastructures, creating more pollutions, and all these gas emissions, what we are talking about, when we talk about a unit, then it makes something, but when it is happening at a very large scale, it is enormously destabilizing. So, construction industry can we really think of something else as a more kind of a healing process, of a more accommodative process or a negotiated process? It is that over the time some things is not there. And also when we talk about construction, we don't talk about maintenance because we think everything is maintenance free. Permanence is something that we all achieve. But practically there is nothing which is permanent. Until and unless you really cultivate towards that, so maintenance becomes a headache. So whatever establishment that you have done over the period, because of non-maintenance, it kind of completely derodes. So I think in this kind of situation, I will ask and try and showcase an alternative. We will be talking about very recently in Calcutta, you know, there are the old Chinatown is there, and there are very large kind of properties which almost amounts to acres, built over centuries and in an ad hoc manner. So obviously, if you call for the ground coverage standards, there are almost 90% which is ground coverage. Now, it's a very kind of stingy sites, and after the kind of environment regulation, now the tanneries has been shifted to outskirts of the Calcutta city. What happens to these tanneries with that huge kind of stock that we have? So here is one tannery that I am talking about. It is in the Tangra area, which is extremely congested, and this is where the very major Chinese polarizations were there. So what happens is now these Chinese tanneries, these are kind of landlocked. The road space is not enough. It's not a developable proposition. So what will actually happen to them? So we take this opportunity and then we thought, can we retrofit and make an adaptive reuse, make this as a part of a major kind of a development campaign? So we start with that kind of a example. Now it has almost like 70,000 square foot built up area and built over, as I've said, centuries. So the basic fundamental issue that we are not going to demolish this tannery, number one. So there is no kind of demolition construction waste which is normally associated with any development program. So first is we'll try to use, reuse, then we want to recycle as much as possible, and we want to retrofit to give a new lease of life. So these are basic mandates, and there are many buildings were actually being pulled down, so we collected a lot of recyclable materials from there, and then we kind of slowly move forward in terms of actually designing it. So this is the way the situation that you see is on different phases of the buildings which are existed at there, and the kind of situation, some has 16 feet height, some are 20 feet high, so there is a height, volume wise there is a kind of a play, and absolutely non-serviced kind of a floor space, no daylight penetration, nothing. So what we have done is, we then actually try to parcel this out depending on the kind of volume, what we can do, where the sanitation facilities, how we can bring out the daylights within, taking out some part of the walls so that daylight can infiltrate into this building, strengthening the building from within so that it is now adaptable to accommodate new kind of activities. And as a result, we have built almost another 30,000 in this area, so almost 1 lakh square feet without demolishing much. So we have inserted, because where there we have found 20 feet height, we have inserted kind of a mezzanine floor, and we created a different wall space. Now there are mandatory stipulations of environment, so the kind of fire control and other systems were kind of introduced into this. While we doing that, we used paper print as a simple because there are a lot of those products were available we mixed with concrete. So we inserted MS. Today we are talking about steel not being a very sustainable material. We have used steel because that with this kind of a volume is the most apt kind of insertion which is possible without damaging the initial structure and retrofitting. In fact, in some cases we use recycled steel also. So as and when the situation came up, so we actually developed on that. Finally, the roof we have strengthened, so that became actually if you know a bit of the Tangra area, there was no playground, nothing of that sort. So we have converted the roof into a community playground. Now because this is a wholesale Chinese community, we thought that even the streets, so whatever the street mandatory setbacks we have done, we have created community library into the street space, all because of some recycled books we have actually borrowed. We have created the halls which acted like a banquet for the Chinese community. So that is the way a development became a part and parcel of a community development. So everybody kind of added to this. We have created a football ground and indoor game stadium. Today, I feel that this is a place which is now operating an 150 skill development center, acting as a graphic studio, where in fact quite a large number of brands are actually getting their things designed. It has opened up a bakery because Chinese bakery was very famous. So they have opened up a bakery which is involving a lot of community facilities. It has also acted like a kind of a studio and also a gym into this area. So together this place has become an ILIT creative campus. ILIT is a kind of a new leadership entrepreneurship program. So they are actually operating this from this kind of a situation. And in fact, without adding without actually disrupting anything, so they have called me, what is how you manage this construction development waste? There's virtually no construction development waste. In fact, whatever the waste that we can collect it, we have used it. So in a way, it is a kind of all the thermocols and other thing we use for the acoustic panels. The internal, some part of has been air conditioned, rest of the things is naturally ventilated. In a whole, it created a new microsystem of the new system of development, and which is, as all of the discussion that we are talking about, the greenhouse emissions, the pollution level, the livability which is not been addressed, that is one thing which is at the stake, at the measure in the new construction practice. So this is a new way we have to look at the construction. If we can use that, probably we will figure out at every possible situation and every possible context, we can then identify a natural course of construction that will take place and how we can engage our large-scale living heritage, the masons, the traditional wisdom involved. In rural areas, we can definitely use them in type of building development practices. So what Dr. Gupta was saying, all those environment quality consciousness that is adapted, if we can somehow converse them with our lifestyle and with our thinking processes, I think we can completely rechange and reshape our construction and development process. Thank you very much.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartuptv.
panel discussion with innovators who have used constraints as an inspiration to uh, develop innovative products. So for this, I would like to invite our moderator of the session, Dr. Janvi Falke. Janvi Falke is a founding director of Science Gallery, Bangalore. Previously, she held a tenured faculty position at King's College London and pursued her academic career at institutions like University of Heidelberg, Georgia Tech, Lorraine, and Imperial College London. She worked as an external curator for Science Museum London. Her publications include Atomic State, Big Science in 20th Century India, and Science of Giants, China and India in the 20th century. She has also showcased her talent as a producer-director of a documentary film called Cyclotron. She holds a doctoral degree in the history of science and technology from Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. So welcome, Dr. Janvi. Please come onto the stage. Our panel includes Mr. Gaurav Parchani. Gaurav is a co-founder and CTO of Dozy, a company that aims to simplify and transform healthcare in India and beyond. Exclusively designed and manufactured in India, Dozy is India's first contactless remote patient monitoring device. A mechanical engineer by education from IIT Indore, Gaurav is leading Dozy's technology, and he's heading the technology division. Dozy has so far established a presence in 370 hospitals covering 40 plus districts in India and is now expanding its operations in Africa. So welcome, Gaurav, please have a seat. Our next panel member is Ganesh Shankar. Yeah, please come onto the stage. Ganesh is a serial entrepreneur in sustainability and clean tech. He is currently the founder and CEO of FluxGen Technologies. He has also co-founded the Sustainability Mafia with a mission to multiply the impact of sustainability leaders through goal-oriented collaborations. And he also co-founded AirProbe Tech. He's an alumnus of Indian Institute of Science and had worked with GE Digital Energy, Selco Solar, Next First Technologies before embarking on an entrepreneurial journey. Welcome, welcome, Ganesh. So our last panel member is Rajkumar Madan Gopal, a visionary leader. He is currently making significant waves as a co-founder. Please come onto this. Co-founder and CEO of Banyan Nation. Through innovative technology solution, he is pioneering the transformation of Indian recycling value chain, promoting source segregation and achieving maximum landfill diversion. His dedication to environmental sustainability led to his well-deserved recognition as a climate warrior at the Forbes Indian Leadership Award in 2023. Raj holds a master's degree in science in mechanical engineering with a specialization in robotics from University of Delaware. With a unique blend of innovation, environmental stewardship, and a rich engineering background, Raj Kiran is spearheading a positive change in India's recycling landscape. So welcome all of you, and over to you, Janvi.
So thank you very much in the first instance to Dipanita and Priyankana for having invited me to this panel. I first visited IKP in Bangalore in 2018 when I in fact moved back to India to set up Science Gallery Bangalore. So it's wonderful also to kind of come back to the community in a way at a slightly better stage in the development of the institution that we are setting up, and look forward to constructive exchanges going forward. Okay, thank you. So the panel that we are on, would like to consider constraints. And let me say a few things from the perspective of both history, because my training is in history of science and technology, but also lessons that I have learned in the last 5.5 odd years trying to set up a new institution in India and having therefore interacted with a significant number of academics, but also others in Bangalore and elsewhere. So let me start by quoting to you Melvin Kranzberg, the historian of technology, who, so when I was a graduate student, one of the things we contended with was that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And I think one could say the same thing about constraints. They are neither inherently good, nor are they bad. Panelists will of course tell us more clearly about when they can be good and when they actually aren't good, but they're never neutral. And I think sort of unraveling and disentangling that is where lies the work that we need to do in order to, either innovate or, in my case, create an institution and try to continue to tell what is the significance and meaning of technology in context, technology in society. So let me take up a couple of examples, a couple of historical examples in order to make the point that I'm trying to make, because historians are often accused of coming in and saying, oh, but it's all complex. But of course it's complex. I mean, there's nobody who doesn't know that already. But why that might matter. So I guess, I don't know if there's a laser in this. Laser pointer, no, I can't. But nonetheless, I think the third row from this side, second from top, everybody's seen the film, I'm guessing, Oppenheimer. This is an image from the staff of the Manhattan Project. Now, what the Manhattan Project tells us is a constraint of a very, very different kind. It's about compressed timelines. It's about the journey from the discovery of nuclear fission in 1939. It's only in the early 1930s that even the journey in experimental nuclear physics began. But in 1939, we have Lisa Meitner and Otto Hahn telling us that nuclear fission is possible, and therefore the possibility of an atomic weapon became even imaginable in 1939. And in 1945, we already have two bombs being used allegedly to end the war, a highly complex question. But what this tells us is that, counterfactuals aren't necessarily going to allow you to arrive at any kind of a meaningful truth. But if it wasn't for the war, the likelihood of us experimentally having worked out the possibility of nuclear energy was stronger than having put the resources that involved an international collaboration at the scale which was at that point otherwise unimaginable, and the resources that were put into it, the kind of money that went into it, both from industry, academia, and governments, in order to make the atomic weapon possible. That would have been not thinkable had it not been for war. And so contingency is always extremely important to set the context for what kind of technologies get made and don't get made. And so those priorities, or those horizons of priorities, are always outside of the laboratory, always outside of the incubator, and always outside of industrial labs as well. So this is what, we heard Sharad and Vinod say in the morning, geopolitics. Geopolitics is not a product of the lab. Labs function in registers that are entangled with geopolitics, but it's of course not the only constraint. There are several constraints under which agendas get set and resources are mobilized. And since the Second World War, I would always say in my classrooms, for example, that before the Second World War, we would be hard pressed to imagine a country. We also spoke about who has an airline, who doesn't have an airline. Before the Second World War, we would be hard-pressed to imagine a country that would have a Ministry of Science and Technology. After the Second World War, we do not know of a country that doesn't have one. So science and technology are now embedded in what are called reasons of state, right? Like statist ambitions are realized by pumping resources into the production of new technologies and new research. And therefore, the scale at which it is science and engineering have been done since the Second World War means that the money that is pumped in is also at a much higher scale than anything we could have imagined before that. The First World War, of course, saw poison gases, but so most certainly not at the same scale as we saw since the Second World War. And so, constraints. What are those constraints? Right? Like, are those constraints of setting research agendas? Are those constraints of resources? Because these are not compatible, or in a sense, they're not constraints in the same register. And that is something one needs to kind of constantly be attentive to. And the registers are that of the state, of course, of industry and the market, of academia, of even imaginations. Right? Like, can we, as an engineering community or as a scientific community, imagine the horizons where certain things are possible or not possible? And so I think so this for me is a very good example. This is just one of the facilities of the Manhattan Project. And so I always like to remind myself of, what was the scale at which what was allegedly science and engineering science done, the outcome of which was entirely political. The second example that I would like to briefly touch upon is the Green Revolution in India. Major constraint was food security, right? Like, or what today we understand or conceptualize as food security, but basically lack of food, enough to feed the Indian population. So the constraint was scarcity of food, which meant research into high-yield varieties had to be conducted. Not that the roots of it weren't there. In fact, the very first experiments were conducted by an Indian in Mexico before the Second World War, which was then brought back to India. Pandurang Khankoje is the person, for any of you who are interested in looking at. In fact, he's on a mural, or large mural created by Diego Rivera at the Autonomous University in Mexico City. So it's not that the thinking or that research possibility or that the possibility of that solution wasn't there before, but the manner in which it was realized and implemented, both in the lab and on the ground, was determined by a constraint, which was food security. Second was, of course, foreign policy, geopolitics again played in. The kind of help that the Americans were willing to extend towards the Indians, the kind of research that was possible in the Mexican labs and later than in the Indian labs, meant we had the Green Revolution, which created, and here's where constraints Sharad also in the morning indicated the need to think things through. And so what we see as the end result of the Green Revolution are constraints of a different kind: increased salinity of soil, high consumption of water, and of course the production of rice in areas in which rice neither was a part of the diet, but also is simply untenable. Apart from, again, social restructuring in large parts of the Punjab, where landholding patterns changed entirely because now industrial agriculture was the way to go during the Green Revolution, which means social upheaval as well. And so constraints of all kind are also imposed by new kinds of research and new products of technology that we unleash into society. So on the one hand, while research is shaped or solutions are shaped by constraints in different registers around us, the products that we unleash into society or the research that we put in there also creates, in turn, constraints that we may or may not be able to deal with. And historians of technology like to call them unintended consequences. The third, of course, more recent, again, it's like the Manhattan Project, a project of a compressed timeline. Technology known since forever. The pressure of the pandemic meant that we got the vaccine sooner than we would have otherwise, which of course, the debate has been, the debate is ongoing. People are discussing this. Some trust it, some kind of are skeptical towards the long-term outcomes of it. I don't know. This is the case I know the least about, but I don't know the answers, and neither do most of us in the room. But again, it's a case of a constraint that is a pandemic, right? Like, so it's not a constraint that's geopolitical. It's not a constraint that it emerges out of the manner in which we interact with nature and the manner in which we take it for granted, something that Jayashi alluded to, in fact, very, very clearly and with sort of great clarity in the morning. So what is it that so unintended consequences was the point I wanted to make through this. But there's another point that wanted to sort of make it that how does one think about this? How does one think of, so when we have examples, right, like, or when we see success stories or what we identify as success stories, what are the registers in which we place the success? Why do we consider it successful, and how far in the future are we able to imagine? And I don't mean imagine in terms of predict, but what I mean is how far can we think it through? And I think that remains a very, very important point. So constraints don't, what I'm trying to say, I think fundamentally, is that constraints don't often necessarily mean shortages of capital, resources, time or tools. Identifying the right constraints, of course, is essential for any even solution to work. So, constraints can create challenges, which makes things creative, and I think which drives the entire startup vibe, so to speak. But what I think we might want to do is merge these two kind of discourses, for lack of a better word, or merge these two kinds of understandings in order to arrive at a better landscape of what's possible and what's not. And therefore, what we need is new knowledge. If we want to reimagine our relationship to nature, as Jayashree hinted quite strongly in the morning, then we need new knowledge, we need new partnership, but we also need an honest public dialogue about uncertainty, incompleteness, and the tenuousness of the knowledge and products, therefore, that we hold. And I think this needs to be understood better and better in order for us to understand both constraints better, but also the consequences of these ideas that we hold much better. I'll end by quoting a man from about 200 years ago who spoke about how men and women make history, but not under conditions and probably also constraints of their own choosing. And I think having an acute awareness of that, balanced with an optimism that tells us we can still want to control nature, might help us towards a better path. Thank you. To tell us in a sort of, quickly, what is it that you do and how you do it, right? So that we understand, in order to, just so that our audience gets a sense of what space you're coming from, and then we'll quickly move on to speaking about probably your strongest constraint, so that in the second round, and in the end, probably we can open up to then identifying a list of constraints. But it'll be good to get a sense of what is the main constraint you have. So if I may ask you to begin with just telling us what is it that you do and how you do it.
Everyone, good afternoon. Excuse me. So thanks for having me here, IKP, and I think we have a paucity of time, so we'll get going pretty quickly. Banyan today is considered a pioneer in the circular economy space in India. I mean, over the last decade, Mani and I have built an organization that has focused on solving India's garbage problem, and specifically the problem of plastic pollution. So just in the last 2 to 3 years, we put over 1 billion bottles on the shelf that uses Banyan's recycled resin that are safe for human contact and food contact applications. And we work with the likes of Unilever, Reckitt, Shell, Castrol, every FMCG major, every oil and lube major, everything you guys touch is something that Banyan recovers and recycles and puts back on the shelf so that you can keep using it over and over again.
Thank you. That was nice and succinct.
My name is Ganesh from Fluxgen. So this world is going through massive water crisis. I mean, because we consume water not just directly. The amount of water that goes into buying a shirt like this or a jacket is indirect water consumption is much higher. So what we essentially believe is that this will affect business continuity risk to industries. This will means financial risk and compliance risk to actually run their operations, right? And industries are in massive and imminent risk because of water crisis. And just like how water as a liquid is transparent and clear, We make the data of water transparent and clear and build solution on top of it to reduce water consumption by up to 30%. So how we do it is we use digital technologies, AI, IoT, and various other tech to give prescriptive alerts to help them. We primarily help large and very large industries like the Tata Steel, Vedanta Group, of the likes to help them. We have so far saved more than 3 billion liters of water through our tech. Yeah, so look forward to save a lot more in the future.
Do you also work with agriculture? Or is it industry at the moment?
No, agri-processing companies, yes, like food processing, beverage, yes, yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gaurav. I'm representing Dozy. We are a contactless, continuous remote patient monitoring solution powered with artificial intelligence and an early warning system as well on top of this. In a nutshell, what we do is we have these proprietary contactless sensors that go under the mattress, don't even touch the user at all, and capture all the key biomarkers, heart rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, and other physiological parameters. We make them available to nursing stations, and this is in-hospital monitoring outside the ICUs. So for hundreds of patients, you can set up a small command center to have them monitored in one shot. And on top of this, the solution is as easy to use so that it can actually go for home as well. So we're expanding to home monitoring as well as we speak. And there it's also a different challenge altogether. I think we'll speak about the challenge and problems in the next round.
Absolutely. So, may I start with you? What is your biggest challenge and how have you addressed it? Or what is your biggest constraint and how have you addressed it?
So when I started out as a single founder, still a single founder company. Always thought like, how do I scale a company as a single founder? Because I went on to meet a lot of people and somehow I got people. What I realized is that a founder is not essentially always looking at all the time about operations. Like the fact that I'm speaking in an event like this is also to attract people towards our mission and vision, and eventually they become part of our goals. So actually, that was a big challenge, building the team towards a mission and vision on this. While water, is not a very attractive sector to be, unfortunately, in the past, now it is becoming more attractive. Because water is not well charged. I mean the economics of water.
So was building a team a constraint, or how did you what did you feel was in a way coming in the way of?
See, the unit economics of water is not very attractive like energy or various other sectors, right? So how do you convince? Actually, when I entered the sector, there's or when we were started doing business. Water got almost like 0.07% of total investment in climate tech investment. That is like not just investment at large only. So there's not enough money in this field to actually be invested in this. On the other hand, lot people don't think that is a great opportunity. While the crisis was very clear that we are going through big crisis, whether 70% of water in India is contaminated and 21 Indian cities running out of groundwater. So all the problems are very glaringly visible, but people were not willing to take a career in this or investment in this. So how do you? So events like this gave me opportunity to give great narratives about this to help people get in, and I met most of my people in events like this. So whenever I get a chance like this, I don't miss a chance, because eventually when they hear out the challenges of water, they start. You get very specifically interested people in water sector come and join us. So that's how I think a lot of thing to do with storytelling kind of helped us get the right set of team today. And today, of course, it is becoming a very attractive sector. So it's not been so difficult to get people.
So Gaurav, what would you say has been the one big constraint for you, and how did you work around it?
So it was very interesting, your slides to begin with, where you said challenges are neither good nor bad or nor they're neutral. Unfortunately, we do consider them good. And that's how we've always looked at it. And these are problems that are waiting to be solved. That's are essentially the way to look at them. And for us, And just to kind of give you a little bit of idea around the challenge that we're working around, right, or the constraint that we're working around. In India, we have 2 million hospital beds. Out of that, 100,000 of them are ICU, 125,000, which have continuous monitoring, 1:1 nurse to patient ratio, and the best of cares possible because the patient is at very high risk. As you move outside the ICU, just 2 steps down the room, uh, suddenly 1.9 million beds or 1.875 million beds. Nurse to patient ratio, although recommended 1:4, starts from 1:8, 1:10, 1:15. In some of the rural areas and public hospitals in Chhattisgarh, I've even seen 1:25. And this is not uncommon. Now, the sad reality because of this is that we end up doing spot checks, and at the end of the day, the sad reality is that code blues do happen. Patients are admitted to ICU in emergency from the ward because they're identified very, very late, or there are mortalities outside the ICU that do happen. For an ideal hospital, if there is a mortality that has to happen, it has to happen in the ICU, not outside. That means that we tried everything that we could to save that patient. And that's the sad reality. Now, multiple studies in the last 5 decades have shown enhanced monitoring frequency, continuous monitoring saves lives. You will identify the patient much earlier on. You will be able to take corrective action for many cases then and there in the ward, and for many cases transfer the patient to the ICU at the right time, not in a code blue. Now, this is pretty clear since the last 5 decades. But why hasn't this happened? In our country, still 1.9 million beds are still unmonitored, and not just in our country, even in the developed world as well. And this has to do with constraints, because since the solution was so easy and clear in front of you, you still could not do it. A, because resource constraints in the healthcare industry. We are severely short of nurses, doctors, severely short of intensivists. On top of that, the current tech that we had from long ago in terms of monitoring required resources for compliance. When I say compliance, availability of data, collection of data, collection of these vitals and presenting them to the right person at the right time. So both these combined together present that constraint, that single largest constraint, that you don't have the tech that can work without too much interference, with minimal interference, or minimal requirement of effort. At the same time, severe shortage, which is just increasing and increasing and increasing.
So let me add a footnote to it here. So you're speaking to us about a circumstantial constraint, right? What we're trying to understand here in this room is what was the so this is a larger situation constraint, right? What was the constraint that came in your way of trying to do your work, right? Like, because this for you is an opportunity. Right? This is not a constraint around which you're trying to work. For you, this is an opportunity to develop something.
Absolutely.
What was the constraint in order for you to actually be able to develop what you developed?
Correct. So I think the answer falls right through this, because what we essentially did was to get to this opportunity. First thing that we did was we removed the amount of effort required for nurses to monitor a patient. So we made it completely contactless. So the compliance is given for when the patient is on the bed. But for us, the major constraint was people did not believe it, right? How come a monitor can be contactless? What is this new thing? A new thing, and that too out of a startup in India. How can you make such a thing where you can give heart rate, respiration rate, blood pressure from under the mattress? The mattress can be as thick as it can be. How can you even do that? So that sort of a disbelief, or saying that, oh, this almost seems like magic, was a big constraint for us to convince.
And how did you work your way through it?
We took multiple approaches to that. We did multiple clinical studies. We've done 7 clinical studies. We have almost 100,000 data points to show the efficacy against the conventional monitors that are there in the ICU. Second, we got the regulatory clearances, so we are FDA cleared. So that also helps in terms of bringing in credibility as well. Third was the brute force approach, which was when I approach a hospital, we end up doing a 1-week demo that you use it and see whether it works or not. And then you believe. So using is believing.
So trust was a constraint.
Yes.
And,
it still is.
Or objectivity was a trust.
Yes.
And you were
But these are the 3 ways we solve it.
Understood. May I ask you to share with us, Raj, what were the constraints that fell in your way, and how did you work around?
For sure. I mean, a startup at the end of the day is born out of constraints. So I think it's our job to lay down the framework and operate within the constraints that we have to break out and establish that structure, whether it's organizational or business or the otherwise. I think over the last decade, I mean, we've been able to do that pretty successfully at Banyan. I mean, one of the ongoing dialogues and conversations in the space right now is that I think regulation is catching up to the work that we've already been doing. And that's the dialogue that we are now part of, at a local and at a national and international level, is to drive the adoption of circular polymers, drive the adoption of recycled resins, not just in India, but across the globe as well in a big way. And I think that will be the next phase of our work in the next 3 to 5 years and beyond.
Okay. So if I were to, as a sort of concluding round, ask each of you to draw up a checklist of between 3 and 5 constraints that startups in India confront, what would they be? May I ask you to start?
I think in our case, I covered the trust bit, but the first and obvious, specifically healthcare startups in India face is the brunt of the regulatory approvals that we need to get without the funding. So that's the second part of it. So it's a chicken and egg problem, right? You require funds to get the approvals, but you require the approvals to be credible enough to get the funds. So funds, regulatory approvals. Another bigger thing in healthcare, particularly in India, is, since I mentioned the shortage bit of it, which has a side effect in terms of that the existing healthcare providers are overloaded. So their appetite for new solutions, new technology, in fact, which are going to help them, is even lesser. So you have to make them believe that, yes, you do give me some time, basis that I will in future generate so much value for you that will solve your problems. But that appetite to hear that solution and believe in it is pretty less as well. So these three, I would say, to a healthcare startup or a healthcare founder in India, are pretty kind of glaring constraints, and you have to solve for that.
Thank you. That again was very concise. Please.
Yeah, so while the planet is warming every day, like we talk about climate change, there's a lot of effort just going in the direction of climate change mitigation, which is very important. But at the end of the day, the adaptation and resilience is equally important. Unfortunately, in the climate space, that is seen like a step parent. And whether it is in terms of funding or whether it's in terms of projects at various levels, it's not taken as seriously as climate change mitigation. And water, by far, it's said that if climate change is sharp, water is its teeth. And water sector definitely needs a lot more attention. And we're having COP28 in Dubai next month. It's in November. I still think the agenda would not be a lot about resilience and adaptation. So I think that is a very important piece this sector especially needs the attention in terms of all aspects, right? Whether if this building is climate resilient, we don't know, right? That awareness, that a knowledge part which is missing of what is the risk this building has if there is a competition for water, right? I think that piece of information should be more known. Somebody should evangelize that information for people to know what, if they don't take about climate change adaptation strategy today, what will happen to them. Because we are all trying to reduce the temperature of planet, but still, last year, all the biggest fossil fuel company made the highest profit in the history. So with that information, at least we should start realizing that we have to start focusing on adaptation and resilience equally. Yeah, that's the...
So constraint of imagination,
yeah,
and discourse, public
debate,
public information.
Yeah,
discourse.
yeah.
I mean, the biggest challenge for any startup that's trying to solve a problem is the sector that you're in investable or not. I think that's the fundamental problem that you need to answer for yourself, and I think you have the responsibility to answer it for the wider community of investors as well. I think that's something that we have done fairly successfully in the last decade. And we see a lot of more maturity in the sector now, and a lot more VCP funding coming in globally as well. The other thing is, I mean, we work in very informal markets, very fragmented, very intricate, and very connected, very high touch. It's again, not only resource constrained, but you're constrained for infrastructure as well. So we've made that our responsibility now in our next phase of growth to actually set up that infrastructure to build the resilience in the supply chains so that we can drive value end to end. So these two are the big things.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartup TV.
We'd like to start with an announcement of a new partnership for IKP. As some of you might be aware, IKP is entering into a partnership with Montgomery County, Maryland, United States. We're going to be formalizing the partnership through a memorandum of understanding today. And this MOU is going to enable IKP affiliated companies seeking to enter and access US markets with a lot of support, and similarly it will also be a bridge for companies in Montgomery County to partner with IKP affiliated companies. I'd like to, Deepankita is on stage, and we'd also like to welcome Mr. Mark Elrich, who is the County Executive, Montgomery County, Maryland, United States.
So if I can say something quickly off topic, I've listened to two really interesting discussions over the last hour, and I was fascinated by the last one because you made me think about something. You referenced the suit jacket, and think about all the water that went into the suit jacket, and I was thinking like major progress in minimizing water use by eliminating the wearing of suit jackets. But then you'd have to deal with what you were talking about, unintended consequences, which would be unemployment. So all these things are complex, but the discussions have been really interesting. I just want you to know, I'm Mark Elrich, I'm the County Executive of Montgomery County. Somebody told me earlier that's like the rough equivalent of a chief minister here, because we all have different forms of government. We're a county of about 1.1 million people, which is small compared to you. The entire DC region, which is considered really vibrant and big, has about 6 million people. So it's a very, very different landscape. We are very interested in opportunities, and the reason we're here is to expand trade relations between India and between the United States, particularly in tech fields, pure tech and also biotech. And we've brought companies with us, so we come not just seeking Indian companies that would like a footprint in the United States, but we brought companies that are looking for a footprint in India. And we think the best way you do trade relations is when trade relations are bilateral, and everybody gets something out of this relationship. And you have amazing facilities here. I was just over at T-Hub, and I am envious. It is amazing now, and when they just talk about what it's going to be in a matter of, I guess, months, it is just a real marvel, and I really, appreciate that you've been able to do something that we struggle with in the United States, which is getting government to invest in infrastructure. And governments here seem far more willing to do that than they are where I came from. So it's a lesson that I will bring back when people say, why can't we be like other people? This is another example of other people do things that we're not willing to do, therefore they're able to do things that we're not able to do. And so it's one of my big takeaways out of this. Montgomery County is the third largest biocluster in the United States and the fourth in terms of talent pool. We have the highest concentrations of PhDs and graduate degrees in the United States and in and around Montgomery County. So we're pretty well positioned for this. And we have a large cluster of biotech companies, including AstraZeneca and GSK and other companies you might be familiar with. We have large land use realtors that specialize in this kind of space. And we are going to be opening up, and Dr. Varshney, who's here today from the University of Maryland, an Institute for Health Computing, where the goal is to start merging the research capabilities of AI with biological research. I saw that firsthand as COVID vaccines were developing. I'm old enough to think that all lab work was done in actually wet labs, and they weren't done on computers, and increasingly we see things are being done on computers and not wet labs. And so it was kind of eye-opening, and AI is one of those things, great possibility, possibly great risk, but great possibility in terms of speeding research and discovery and using data and learning from data in ways we couldn't even imagine before. So Dr. Varshney is going to be setting up this Institute for Health Computing at Montgomery County, and we think that's something that's going to be of interest to many of the companies in India, whether you're working on the research side or whether you're working on patient data and the collection of information. We think there are opportunities to partner. Montgomery County is in a position where we can provide soft landings, and that's one of the things we want to be able to do. We can, if a company wants to come to Montgomery County, we have the ability to facilitate the soft landing by providing legal support so you can get incorporation in the United States. Incorporation in the United States gets you access to federal, state, and local money. Montgomery County has MOVE grants and has grants that facilitate rent subsidies for companies that want to come here, grants for companies depending on how many people they bring to Montgomery County. So we're very anxious to develop these relationships. Our conversations over the last 2 days have absolutely been phenomenal. We've had a lot of people who are interested, and we want to continue this kind of relationship on an ongoing basis. We'd like to partner with where we came from this morning, because what they have over there and their ability to do things is something we need to be able to do. We don't work at that scale, and to see what they're able to do has just really been eye-opening. So we're going to sign this memorandum of understanding, and I'm very excited about this. I have a certificate to the IKP Knowledge Park in recognition and appreciation of your support for Montgomery County, Maryland's 2023 trade mission to India. Your organization's willingness to support relationship building and partnership opportunities among IKP startups and alumni and Montgomery County will lead to business growth, new jobs, and technology innovation in both regions, which will benefit businesses and residents in our jurisdictions and around the world. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks. In fact, it's a small meeting that happened in US Bio, and I met Judy, and of course Mark is so enthusiastic to understand the ecosystem here in India. And luckily, the credit goes to BIRAC, because we discussed in the BIRAC stall, the entire India map is there. So it's easy to explain them what we have and what are our strengths, and immediately I introduced them to ma'am, the Panita ma'am, and today it's a reality. And a lot more to work, Mark and Judy. Thanks a lot. Wonderful time for the rest of the weeks. Thank you so much.
informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.
So the first panel, the first plenary set the stage for the discussion. So we had, Jayashree, who scared us a little bit with some of her slides. And then we had Sharad telling us how, the way to address these problems is to start by taking a panga. And then in the second plenary, we engaged with the counterintuitive thought that constraints can be sources of creativity. And now we're all set to explore the possibility of partnerships. This is actually a fairly important aspect of the whole thing, because we're talking about the challenges of Anthropocene. When we talk about that, we usually use words such as planet scale and global. So it means two things. One is, of course, it refers to the massive scale of the challenges. But the second thing, it also indicates that boundaries are not very relevant. When we're talking about changes in temperature or pollution, line of control and line of actual control may not matter that much. So to also address these challenges in an impactful way and at scale, we need to create partnerships across traditional boundaries between governments and business, between for-profits and not-for-profits, between innovators and bureaucrats, and such stuff. And this means that we are going to have individuals and institutions which are wired in a certain way, with different kinds of goals, different incentive systems, different cultures who have to work together and continue to work together. And such partnerships can get quite complex, conceptualizing them and executing them. And to explore this, we have got three remarkable people who are going to be sharing their experiences in leveraging partnerships in different areas. We're going to have Professor Mahesh Shankaran, professor at NCBS, who will be talking about working across continents to save the savannas. Then we'll have Dr. Ashish Nimgaonkar talking about scaling impact by innovation, biomedical innovation. And then we'll have Dr. Chintan Vaishnav talk about forging global partnerships to nurture startup ecosystems. Chintan is not able to join us today, so he has kindly sent us a video with some of his remarks, and we'll play that. First, I'd like to invite Dr. Mahesh Shankaran on stage. Mahesh, please. So Dr. Mahesh Shankaran is Professor of Ecology and Ecosystems at NCBS, Bangalore. He's one of the researchers whose work is helping reshape our view on the role of ecosystems and climate change. He got his PhD from Syracuse University, and he also did his postdoctoral work in US and UK before joining NCBS in 2009. He has recently played a pivotal role in an IPCC publication, which highlighted the work of biodiversity and ecosystems in the relationship to climate change. And his work has also been recognized by his fellowships. He's recently been elected to the Fellowship of the Indian Academy of Science in 2020 and the Indian National Science Academy in 2021.
Thank you for asking me to be a part of this session. And in the interest of full disclosure, I must say that this is an entirely different kind of audience from the one that I'm used to. And hopefully my talk will sort of meet the remit that was given to me. So I was asked to talk about cross-continental collaborations that we're involved with in terms of savanna ecology. And well, we work with a lot of ecologists from across the world, in Africa, South America, Australia, and so on and so forth, addressing questions of very basic scientific relevance, right? But I thought that's probably less of an interest to this group. So what I thought I'd talk about today is a kind of challenge that all of us, or all savanna ecologists working across the globe seem to face. We've written about it, we've written policy pieces, we've written, perspectives in sort of high impact papers and journals and so on and so forth. But the problem is, we keep shouting, but nobody seems to be listening. So I really don't know what the answer to this. We've been trying to collaborate to get this message across, and it seems to be one not of uptaking new technologies or ideas, but of unlearning what seems to be ingrained in many of us. And I think that's really a hard problem. I don't know what the answer to it is. So what I thought I'd do is actually just highlight the challenge that we've been talking about, and then, hopefully there will be avenues for collaboration and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about is actually the issue with planting trees in these open ecosystems that we work in. I don't want to start off on a negative note, but just to set the context, people have already talked about this in the morning, right? But we know fossil fuel combustion and land use changes have caused an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. This is the famous Keeling curve, which shows CO2 concentrations on the top of Mauna Loa. It's been the longest continuous measurements of CO2 that we have. And as you can see, CO2 concentrations seem to be increasing over time. We all know this, and currently it's about 420 parts per million. And because of this increase in greenhouse gases, we know temperatures globally have also been changing. This is a figure that shows global temperatures over time, and every successive decade has been warmer than the previous. 8 of the last hottest years have been in the last decade. And 2023, we've hit records in terms of the summer temperatures, hottest ever recorded, and we're probably on track to break annual records too. Time will tell. And as Nelson was talking about early in the morning, the thing is ocean temperatures are also going up. And the NASA webpage had an article a few months ago saying the ocean has a fever because they recorded the highest temperatures ever in July this year. And as you can see the black line, these warmer temperatures are continuing, right? So this is a bit of a problem. Possibly in an El Nino, we are in an El Nino phase that can possibly extend into next year. And this has major consequences for coral reefs and ocean life and so on and so forth, right? And the thing is, governments over the last couple of decades have recognized that we seem to be in this sort of pickle with respect to climate change, and so we need to do something about it. And so there's been this call for climate action. And there are two basic approaches here. One is technological solutions to actually reduce the emissions in the first place, and also probably reduce atmospheric CO2 concentrations through carbon capture and so on. And the other one that's been put out quite a bit are these nature-based solutions, right? And one caveat here is, while nature-based solutions are necessary, they are unlikely to be sufficient in terms of mitigating climate change in the absence of any technological solutions, right? But I'm going to be focusing a little bit on these nature-based solutions. And one nature-based solution that seems to have, that seems to be all the rage right now is tree planting to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, right? And this has led to many initiatives like the Trillion Trees program to plant 1 trillion trees across the globe. And more locally, we can see, these different governments from different states are trying to plant 22 crores of trees in a day, or even, 1 lakh saplings in the arid, cold deserts of, the Ladakh region. And while reforestation, that is the planting of trees in areas that the trees were there earlier, is definitely something we need to be focusing on. Afforestation, which is the planting of trees in areas that they weren't there earlier, can be problematic, right? And which are these kind of areas where we need to be a little cautious when we are planting trees? And those are the kinds of systems that we work on, which are grasslands and savanna ecosystems. Now, the term savanna, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it refers Well, it's a 16th century word. Well, it was first recorded in the 16th century, and it's derived from a Carib Amerindian word, which means treeless plain. But in its current avatar, it refers to systems that have both trees and grasses. So you have a continuous grass layer, and you have a discontinuous layer of trees, right? And the reason why people tend to plant trees in savannas, and a lot of these tree planting initiatives are focused on these open natural ecosystems, which are savannas and grassland. Why is that? For many reasons. One, if you want to plant a tree, you're looking for an open space, and here's a lot of open space where you can actually go and plant trees. The other is this outdated concept of a climax community, which, people tend to think that forests are the climax, and systems like these are actually degraded forests, that humans have gone sometime in the past, cut these trees, and made these systems open, and so these are degraded systems that actually, need to be restored. But both our work and the work of colleagues across the globe has shown that savannas are not degraded ecosystems. They're in fact very ancient ecosystems. They evolved in the late Miocene, about 5 to 10 million years ago, and they're fairly widespread, and these are not degraded forests. The other major issue facing savannas and grasslands, particularly in the Indian context, is they're classified as wastelands administratively, right? This is a fallout from a colonial legacy. But the fact is, if they're classified as wastelands, then they can easily be diverted to other uses, such as tree planting initiatives, right? But like I said, savannas are actually fairly ancient ecosystems. They're very widespread. They cover about 20% of the Earth's land surface and more than half the area of the southern continents. They support a large fraction of the world's human population and a majority of its rangeland and livestock. And for ecologists like me, they're home to the greatest diversity and density of wild herbivores and carnivores of any ecosystem on Earth. Now, most of you, if you watch National Geographic or Discovery, you'd have seen, the first image that comes of a savanna is the Serengeti. That's, these vast open plains teeming with ungulates. But that's not the only place where you have savannas. Like I said, savannas are fairly widely distributed, and we also have them in the Indian context. But they tend to be a little bit more wooded compared to systems in Africa, right? So the savannas of India, these are again photos of Indian savanna ecosystems. They host very iconic species, many of which are threatened. You have the black buck, you have foxes, you have hyenas, and you have the great Indian bustard there on the left, of which there are only about 100 individuals left remaining in the wild. It's a highly threatened bird. It was a contender for the national bird of India, but if rumors are to be believed, then it lost out to the peacock because, a simple spelling mistake or a mispronunciation can lead to, embarrassment for, the country. So anyway, all of these iconic species are characteristic of these open savanna ecosystems. But the problem is they're not as protected when compared to forests. So many of these grasslands in India are actually not protected. Right. And when we look at savanna ecosystems, typically you see an open space, right? And so there's no carbon. You can't actually see any carbon being sequestered above ground. So people tend to think that savannas and grasslands don't play a role in the global carbon cycle. But that's not true. If you look at net primary production, that's the amount of carbon that's fixed per unit area per year. Savannas are actually, they account for about 30% or about a third of the carbon that's being fixed by the terrestrial biosphere is actually occurring in these grasslands and savannas. And, compared to tropical forests, which are obviously, the highest in terms of fixing carbon, savannas sequester about 7 tons per hectare per year. So it's not trivial, right? So they do play an important role in the global carbon cycle. But interestingly, most of this carbon is actually stored below ground. Savannas have much, much more carbon under the ground than above the ground. So because we don't see that much carbon above ground, we tend to think they're actually not useful as carbon sinks. But, tropical savannas store almost as much as tropical rainforests in terms of soil carbon. And if you look at temperate grasslands, or, that's even more. So most of the carbon in these ecosystems is actually below ground, and that's something we need to keep in mind. Yeah? And so the problem, like I said, is everybody and their uncle seems to be going out and planting trees in these ecosystems. And this is problematic for many reasons, right? So tree planting in these ecosystems can actually be a form of degradation rather than restoration. And like I said, there have been a lot of papers written about this in recent years. But again, there seems to be some difficulty with these concepts actually being sort of absorbed and put into practice. Why is it problematic? Why is tree planting in these ecosystems problematic? For one, plantations in these regions often fail, and they don't bring the anticipated carbon benefits. Now you have to put a lot of effort and water into actually getting these saplings and seedlings to survive in these ecosystems in the first place. And the second thing is fire and herbivory are integral parts of these ecosystems. So many of the saplings are either eaten by herbivores or they're burnt, and they tend to die, right? So many of the plantations actually fail. The other thing is loss of soil carbon. When you dig pits to plant these trees, you tend to lose soil carbon. And some studies have shown that actually, when you plant trees in these systems, you tend to lose carbon from the soil such that the net amount of carbon in the ecosystem actually goes down, which kind of beats the whole purpose of planting trees there in the first place, right? We're not really sure why that occurs and when that occurs, but it has been known to occur. The third thing, and somebody was talking about water earlier today, is that thirsty trees compromise hydrological cycles. Trees transpire much more water than grasses, with the result that when you plant trees in many of these ecosystems, it actually affects the hydrological cycles. It can affect stream flow, it can reduce stream flow, and so on. Right? So that's another unintended consequence of tree planting. And finally, grazing for pastoralists. There are millions of pastoralists who actually depend on these lands for their livelihood. And when you plant trees, you reduce grasses, which is what the grazers need, and so it reduces the grazing potential of these lands, right? And so it comes at a cost to livelihoods. And finally, there's loss of native biodiversity. Like I said, these grasslands evolved 5 to 8 million years ago, and all of those spectacular ungulates that you see all over Africa and these dry forest, dry system species in India, they all evolved at the same time. They co-evolved with these grasslands, right? And so we tend to lose this native biodiversity when we plant trees and convert these ecosystems into something else that they were not meant to be, right? So the message here is that, and this is a message that savanna ecologists have been trying to make across the globe, unfortunately with limited success, is that tree planting programs in these ecosystems must be carefully planned. You need to plant the right trees in the right places at the right densities, right? And so rather than plant trees in grasslands, what we need to be doing is prioritizing the restoration of forests or reforestation, planting trees in areas where they were already there before. And for grasslands, we actually need to be working on restoring grasslands. Our work has shown that even after 20 years of, keeping herbivores, keeping fires, and increasing tree densities, most of the carbon in these systems are actually coming from the grasses. The grasses are still the drivers of soil carbon. So we need to be finding ways to restore these grasslands. Unfortunately, unlike tree planting, restoring grasslands is a major problem. We really don't know how to do it properly, right? And there's clearly a need for much more work here to be able to successfully restore these grasslands. Of course, planting in urban, semi-urban, farmland edges, all of that is fine. We should be encouraging that. And provided food security is not compromised, we can plant some amount of trees in grasslands, but we need to ensure, and in savannas, but we need to ensure that they're planted at the right densities, right? And I'm just going to finish, if I have time, to just show 3 or 4 slides, a little story of how planting the wrong trees in the wrong place can have very long-lasting unintended consequences. I don't know how many of you have seen these ecosystems, the Shola grassland mosaics. If you go to the higher elevations of the Western Ghats, you'll see this very unique ecosystem. And this is pretty unique because it's a system where you have both trees and grasses in the same place under the same climate, right? And unfortunately, you see these systems in other parts of the globe, like in in Angola, Gabon, South Africa, Brazil, and so on, but they're very restricted where they occur. So they're highly localized and they're highly threatened ecosystems. So this is a story about the Nilgiris and Ooty. I'm sure most of you have been to Ooty. Is there anybody here who's been to Ooty before? Yeah? Right, so in the early 1800s, when the British first went to Ooty, this is what Ooty looked like. So I had a student who went to the India office in the British Library and went through all the old colonial literature. And so Ooty in 1834 looked like this. It was a forest grassland mosaic. That is Ooty Lake there, by the way. And the Britishers looked at this, the colonial foresters, and they had this philosophy that trees are the climax communities and grasslands are not. So they looked at this and said, the indigenous people have totally mismanaged this habitat. This should be a forest, but because of their mismanagement of the habitat, this is what it looks like. But we know now, based on paleo evidence, that these systems have existed for at least 40,000 years, long before humans have come in, right? And so what did the British do? Colonial foresters went and started planting trees. So this is St. Stephen's Church in Ooty. This is what it looked like in 1834. Then they started planting trees. By 1851, it looked like this. By 1905, you'd converted this grassland into this. And 2015, this is what it looks like. So a native grassland that was unique, hosted unique species, hosted endemic species, all of it's gone. The interesting thing here to note is that they tried planting native trees, and all of those plantations failed. So what the British did was they brought about 40 different species from across the globe, and some of them succeeded. Actually, if you go to Ooty now, most of what you see is actually pines and eucalyptus and all native, non-native species. And one species in particular, Acacia mearnsii, a wattle, got out of control, right? And so this is what it looks like. So this green patch is what the native habitat is. All of that dirty green around it is grassland that's been invaded by this one species, Acacia mearnsii. It's just gone out of control. We're not really sure how to control it. It's changing hydrological cycles, it's changing biodiversity, it's changing everything, right? So we just need to be aware when the next time we go to plant a tree that you're actually planting the right tree in the right place, and it's a native species and not an exotic species. So bringing it all down, essentially what we need are win-win solutions to this problem. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPCC and IPBES, had a joint report that came out a couple of years ago. And essentially what they highlighted there is that we have two crises. We're dealing with a climate crisis, but we're also dealing with a biodiversity crisis. And both of these are linked. So climate change is linked to biodiversity loss, and both of these can have the potential to negatively impact human well-being and quality of life. And you cannot focus on one while ignoring the other. And that's what we've been doing for the most part, is we've just been focusing on climate change and trying to mitigate climate change, but this is coming at a cost of biodiversity. And we need to stop and think about our approaches going ahead, right? And this is a bit of a confusing figure. You don't need to worry about it, but this is again from the same report. On the top, it shows on the left, the actions you can take for climate, and on the right, its implications for biodiversity. So the blue lines are ones that have positive effects on both sides. The red lines are when climate actions have a negative impact on biodiversity. And at the bottom, it's the other way around, biodiversity actions and its impact on climate. So as you can see on the top, there are a lot more red lines. So if you just focus on climate, it's going to have a lot more negative effects on biodiversity, whereas if we approach it from a restoration viewpoint where we also keep biodiversity in mind, then there are a lot more win-win solutions when it comes to climate, right? And so that's the take-home message, is basically we need to be thinking not just about climate, but also about biodiversity and human well-being. And when it comes to actually implementing these, like I said, there seems to be this belief for many of the people that trees are good and a forest is good, where a grassland is bad. And this is something people have done a survey, and it's called biome awareness disparity. It's not just here. Globally, people seem to value forests more than grasslands. And how do we change that? Because unless you change that, we're not going to be able to sort of address these issues that impact biodiversity? Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question, but it requires, working with forest department officials, it requires working with government officials, it requires working with industry, CSR, people who are giving money to plant trees, should think about where these trees are going to be planted, right? And if it's planted in the right place, then that's great. So I'd like to stop there. Maybe I've just gone on more than I should. But yeah, I'd like to thank all of these people.
Now I'd like to call upon Dr. Ashish Nimgaonkar. Dr. Nimgaonkar is a physician scientist, entrepreneur, and educator. He is founder and chief medical officer and chief of R&D at Glycine Therapeutics, which is developing innovative gut-restricted oral medication for obesity and type 2 diabetes. He also holds an academic position at Johns Hopkins University and is an active gastroenterologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Nimgaonkar is an accomplished and award-winning innovator, and his research is funded by the National Institutes of Health and National Health Foundation in the US. He's got a very well-rounded academic background as well. He's an MBBS, he's a physician from Osmania. Then he gained MTech from IIT Bombay and an MSc from Harvard MIT's Division of Health Sciences and Technology. And he completed his residency in internal medicine at Harvard and undertook dual fellowships in gastroenterology and design at Stanford.
Thanks for the generous introduction, Sivaram. And I'm really glad that I'm sandwiched between two terrific speakers, because as they say, as long as the beginning and the end is good, no one cares about the middle. I don't have any slides to share, but I do want to share some of my perspectives and stories that I've gathered over the last 2 decades. And some of these exemplify the real power of collaboration and partnerships. When it comes to innovation in biomedicine, it's really hard, right? And by definition, innovation requires interdisciplinary crosstalk and collaboration across different aspects of research and development. The earliest memory actually that I had, which inspired and triggered me to going into becoming a researcher and an entrepreneur, was the Human Genome Project. Some of you may have heard Human Genome Project, which was the first project of its kind sponsored by the US government to sequence the entire human genome, which had 3 billion base pairs. This was almost 20 years back, and it took close to 10 years to get the whole entire human genome sequenced, but it required collaboration between 20 different universities across 4 different continents at a price tag of somewhere between $3 to $5 billion. But it was a collaboration at scale that since has really reinvented the whole field of biotech industry, whether it be diagnostics or drug discovery. I always had the aspiration to be an entrepreneur ever since I learned about these discoveries. And the real inspiration was to get products from conception into patient care to have a global impact. But when I started on this journey, I was very naive in my thinking, and I used to think that all it mattered for a successful product was to have a great idea, and then some magic happened. But that magic was really planning and execution, and a large part of that was building teams and leading these teams across not just the company, but also our multiple different organizations. This is particularly important in a healthcare startup. By definition, a startup is resource constrained. And when you're trying to build a company from scratch, you have to rely on external partners and collaborators and be resourceful in how you manage those partnerships. Whether it's early stage R&D where you are talking to other scientists and as well as groups outside your sphere of expertise, or later stage drug development, which we are at my company Glycin. We are now a phase 2 clinical stage company, and we talk to a lot of CROs and pharma partners. At the end of the day, it is the individuals that you're talking to on the other side of the table. And it comes back to aligned incentives and ambitions. By definition, these kind of collaborations are pretty complex and can be really symbiotic if they are structured the right way. An example that comes to my mind is the discovery of insulin. More than 100 years back, Fred Banting, who was a physician scientist, discovered insulin in his lab in Canada. And for many years, he toyed around with trying to make the insulin, synthesize the insulin. It was a phenomenal discovery, but it went nowhere until he found the right partner in Eli Lilly, which is a global pharma company, and the rest is history. And that just exemplifies that you as an individual can do only so many things, and to really have impact at scale requires this kind of sort of collaboration. So, but collaborations are not without their risks. When I looked at the failures in biomedical innovation, what I learned and realized was most of the failures happen because of stakeholder mismanagement, misalignment of expectations, and differing risk tolerance between the partners. So no matter how promising a collaboration is, it is essential to build that relationship and address potential failure points very early on in that partnership. Because at the end of the day, we are, as individuals, are only one drop, but together we make the ocean. And so it is critical that we have a shared vision and alignment as we execute on a goal which is for the greater good. Thanks.
Chintan Vaishnav is currently the Mission Director, Atal Innovation Mission at Niti Aayog. And also more to the context, he chaired the Startup 20 track during India's G20 presidency recently. Chintan is a socio-technologist trained as an engineer to design large systems which have both human complexity as well as technological complexity. He is currently on leave from his academic position at MIT to work at Niti Aayog. As teacher, innovator and entrepreneur, Chintan splits his time between teaching and research at MIT and living and working with rural communities in India to build solutions that can overcome constraints and constraints that are fundamental to the human condition. Chintan couldn't join us, so he has sent us his remarks over a video.
Many of you know about Startup 20. This was the only new engagement group under India's G20 presidency. India proposed it, we took it from 0 to 1, and now it has been made a permanent feature of the G20 architecture as we move forward. This is an important moment. In some ways, in the global startup policy, this is a watershed moment because until now, G20 has had only one group that represented businesses called the B20 or the Business 20. Going forward, there will be two groups representing businesses. B20 that will represent the large corporations, and Startup 20 will represent startups and the SMEs. This is the first year in G20's history when startups have written a policy recommendation for the world leaders. They've asked for several things in this policy recommendation. First of all, the 20 nations plus the 9 invited nations came together to call upon the world leaders to raise the annual investment in the global startup ecosystem to $1 trillion annually, which is about 2.5 to 3 times what it has been over years. In addition, they've asked for the globe to embrace global frameworks for startup definition, governance framework that startups can embrace, and so on, so that the valuation can become in line with value. They have suggested ways of creating access for startups to global financial capital, to global talent, global markets, global mentors, and so on. They've advocated emphasizing inclusive practices and have cataloged some of the greatest practices that exist in inclusion today across the globe. They have identified ways for taking startups that are of global interest global. And then finally, they have called upon the world to create a globally networked institution of existing agencies so that startups that deserve to go global can go global more easily. Sorry for a lot of information very quickly, but this is very relevant to this forum. First of all, I must say that I'm terribly sorry that I can't be with you in person there in Hyderabad. This is indeed one of my favorite forums organized by IKP. Every time I've come there, I have learned a lot, and I'm sure you have a lot of excitement coming as this conference gets underway. Now, this year's theme of sort of positively impacting the Anthropocene is a very relevant theme to what is happening with respect to the creation of this Startup 20 as well. If you take almost any problem that is created due to human activity, or where human activity is a major contributor today, take any sustainable development goal today, and you break it up into smaller pieces of the puzzle that we will have to address in order for us to address the SDG, and then go out and look for startups everywhere across the world to see if there are startups solving pieces of these puzzles. And I bet you, for any challenge that you take on, you will find great startups in some or the other corner of the world solving for that piece of the puzzle. The need of the hour is to have a platform that brings these startups together more seamlessly so that they can work together and they can make a difference on the Anthropocene positively. So I hope with the creation of the Startup 20 as a forum that enables such work, and I welcome you all to come participate as we turn this great policy communique that we have produced into action through various platforms. Thank you very much.
About the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartuptv.
Continuing the celebration of partnerships, IKP would like to acknowledge some of our extremely valuable partnerships, long-standing partnerships, and I'd invite Dipanvita on stage to recognize and celebrate some of our partners.
We have been working with BIRAC right from the stage when BIRAC was a project before BIRAC was established. So we felt that if we have to talk of one institution which has helped build partnerships, just not with IKP, IKP is a partner of BIRAC, but there are several other institutions. If we have to talk of one institution in India that has shown the power of partnerships for building innovation, it is BIRAC. And we would like to invite Dr. Jitendra Kumar. And I think we have also Dr. Shubharanjan Chakravarti and Dr. Shishendu Mukherjee. Manish is not here. Yeah, so.
అడిపోయినప్పుడు ఆయన ఇది ఆ సైడ్కి జరిగి తీసుకున్నాం కొంచెం
12 years is a long time, and I think what BIRAC has done is absolutely stupendous. And a year-old, not even a year-old, but it has a very long-standing impact on the startup regulatory system. It's a partnership with JS's Academy of Higher Education that we have forged, and we have Dr. Patil with us. And this is a global regulatory forum that IKP has set up with JS's Academy, and we want to celebrate the partnership. Thanks everyone. There are two roundtables, one on responsible biomanufacturing, the other on One Health. You would know which session to go to. So tea, coffee will be served at your roundtable, so don't worry about that. And I know many of you, even if you're not participating, you can be observers. So please join the roundtable. And after 6 p.m. we have a BIRAC GBI Roadshow, the Global Business Bio India. Global Bio India. And I was thinking bio has to be there, B has to be BIRAC. Global Bio India Conference, a roadshow of that. That's at the Novotel Ballroom, which is just in the next building, the Novotel Hotel. That's from 6:15 to 7, and that is followed by the awards at the Lords at 7:15. So we'll all see you at the roundtable, at the GBI Roadshow, and the award ceremony, and followed by dinner. Thank you.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to MyStartup TV.
Lower standards of Indian layouts, and it is pointed out by international agencies. And looks like this may be a common difficulty. Don't you think we can, of course, it will entail costs, I agree. Don't you think we can have the international experts doing the design itself, and then also at the later aspects, having a mock audit, etc., so that you are well prepared. Of course, it has definitely a cost implications, but also in addition to this, I think the international, because I really feel that if we have to come to the standards of say Samsung Biologicals or Celtrion, we may have to have some collaborative board or engaging with them, bringing them to Indian scenario. Do you think this makes sense? Well, I don't have experience in biomedical, but from the common perspective, I'm just
yeah, definitely. We used to take opinion of experts from FDA and retired FDA inspectors and all. But when the time it comes and our Indians do not, Indian regulatory people do not need that much of accuracy, so we just manage. Because it is money and early to market and money oriented. And after that it becomes extremely difficult to correct those things. So therefore, onus of doing it first time itself right, at least for 10 years, do not change any layout, should lie with the Indian regulators, not outsiders.
Maybe I can add this one. The constraint, because I worked on the complete development cycle of product. So what we find is the gap that we have, and I don't know now, currently it's still existing or not, that we spend less time on the development, early development. So the biopharmaceuticals, when you're doing the early development, I think the QBD approach is absolutely absent, at least when we were doing our R&D. Maybe it has come now, that is good, but this is what is required. There should not be any discrimination between the regulators. So the regulation has to be equal in every, whether it is an Indian regulator, whether it is an European agency, or whether it is an FDA. The question is that maybe we could convince here with much lesser data. But if you have enough data, we talk about the design space. Okay, you have a parameter that you are talking about that, okay, you have to fix those parameters. Now, when you validate those parameters at that range, you don't need to think about later on that whether it is, going beyond. If you don't do it before, during your development phase, then you have big challenges and higher scale. The large scale is very difficult to do it. So all these things have to be done. So during the development itself, the QBD approach has to be incorporated in. And I think all the startups that are now aspiring to do a large scale manufacturing, please make sure that your initial early development is also having all these parameters, your CPP that you create, or the raw material that you try to find out what is critical, what is not critical, as Mr. Goodbye mentioned. We did not measure what are the critical raw materials. All raw materials are critical. So each raw material you change, you have to go through clinical trial. Unless you define in your process that these are the critical raw materials, not all others. So there are multiple things that we need to do during the development, and our development has to be robust. That's very important. Then we don't need to think about the manufacturing, how it will be automatic. We talk about 3 batch as a validation, but now 3 batch validation is completely gone. It is a CPV. FDA look for CPV, continuous process validation. So as you running the batch, you measure the parameters and you go for it. So I think these are the things that we need to incorporate in when you are again going to the regulators for final approval.
Please. So this cough syrup issue, which most of you know, USA has become even more stringent. In fact, actually, there is a request for us to tell the department to go ahead and have a meeting with them together like this and communicate. It's not that if you were from the time this issue has happened. So I think it's very important, as you mentioned, right from the beginning, if we want to be a global player, we need to be not just local standard, we have to be international standards. And that's when we can even more challenging.
Yeah, that is very much true. But then international standard should be same that of Indian standard, and we will contact only India, nobody else. So we come to you, you must directly say that this is what you have to do.
One product, one quality. So you may have something like small molecules. The product is manufactured for the regulated markets. Product is for India. But the concept, in order to be sustained in the biologics space, I think every company now adapted to a policy that one product, one quality. They may be selling it in different places, but today, in order to be sustained, in order to be continued, the beginning of the development itself, you can seek the advice. Right? You can say, okay, this is the quality I have, and then we are into the again. The biologics are the complex generics, but at least you know that again window. So you will say, okay, I have a data, I am there within this window. Is that actually sufficient? Does it meet the standards? Like you always seek the, like you show the data, and then you seek their opinion.
In the interest of having a wider discussion, and then we'll come back to you. Just to set this context, when we're talking about responsible manufacturing, we've touched upon quality right now. They could also be in terms of environment degradation. They could be, you touched upon resource efficiency, how well we use resources. And also in terms of, meeting, we said the regulator sets the standard, but ab initio, setting ourselves up for global standards is the other aspect that one should look at, and not merely meeting the bar. Dr. Dave, you had a point to make.
So just to extend the point which you made on the responsible biomanufacturing.
I think fundamentally we also need to sort of examine or bring out on what basis are we competing? Where does our competitive advantage emanate from? Is it going to emanate from a product of the highest quality manufactured in an environment-friendly manner, or are we competing on merely on cost? And therefore, when we are competing on cost, I'm willing to cut corners where I can. I'll just leave this thought here, Dr.
Yes, this is always gathering my viewpoint. It is ideal to have an international level, one standard, to less regulated countries, Southeast Asia, South America, Africa. So there should not be a catch-22 situation that there will be, all the state level, public level, there will be pressure that if you want to bring this up, which is an idea, which you should have, one standard, the cost of testing, additional parameters, which were rate extending, USFDA, EMA, influenced by insurance costs, which factor is absent here at the moment, all the insurance. So the cost of the product at the home level, as well as for less developed countries that export having volume, it will get affected.
So another way of looking at it, and please feel free to join this. Is it okay to say that cost being a factor, therefore substandard medicine is okay for a particular percentage of the population, and a different category of medication is okay for the other? I don't have the answer. Is this what we are saying?
Because of that, actually, this episode of
exactly
it is just in the cough syrup thing has
exactly.
Yes,
I don't think there is any doubt in that there are different standards for different human beings. I mean, everyone's life is as important as anyone else's. You can't have two quality standards for someone sitting in Africa and somewhere. It's high time we get out of this.
But, we've always had this, and those of us, and I'm going to age myself by saying this, but when we were young, they were, export quality products used to be marketed separately. That means you have, what is sold in India, export quality, this is something better. Dr. Santana.
So we are now the 5th largest economy. We have to stop thinking about cost now. We should not be cost centric, we should be quality centric. Is what I feel, especially in the domains that we work in. And we need to start manufacturing for the world at global standards. Why I took this mic was to little digress from this topic right now and look at regulations, and I want to discuss about a real-time problem that we are now facing, especially with the incubators over here.
Dr. Santana, as long as the regulation and your comment relate to responsible biomanufacturing.
Yes. And that's what I want to tell you. So responsibility starts at the ground level. When this child goes to a nursery, you start teaching him good manners, and responsible manufacturing starts there. And now the issue is, since 2017, when MDR 2017 was put in force by CDSC, 2018 it was launched, 2021 all devices have come in. The problem we are facing now with most of the big grants and the incubators is that they are developing data, they are developing products without being regulatory compliant. They don't even apply for test license, and this is a regular situation. I review a lot of big projects and I always get hit on that. And that is somewhere we need to focus on, and I'm speaking just about medical devices to be very honest. And should it not be that the incubators themselves should get 13485 compliant first, so that all the incubatees over there are within the scope of that 13485 certification, which can always be extended as and when a new incubator comes in, or a new incubator comes into the incubator. And they should start with a test license. And the problem here, what we are talking about is regulation and the regulator, and it's a escalator coming down. Yes, regulators are learning every day like we are, and they are bringing in new regulations to make things more safer. And we are running after that, and that's how this industry is always going to work. So there is no solution to it except being compliant. Sure.
Yeah. So I think talking about quality and cost, I would say from our experience, we were all talking more about B2C, we are talking about B2B, wherein China is a classic example. When enzymes were brought into India, we had Chinese enzymes, also smaller countries. But what happened ultimately is the customers preferred quality and consistency, which was not there in China. Let it be electronics, let it be any other sort of chemical which is coming into India, they are doubtful about the quality. So if we are going to today compromise, we will also be in China. So we have to basically make sure that quality is the ultimate. And I'm sure any consumer or B2B consumer will definitely pay for quality and consistency, which is what was our example classically.
So while talking about responsibility, we've talked about quality. Another area which we've not touched upon and which starts or emanates from design is environment management. One just has to go to Ankleshwar in Gujarat or Pashamailaram closer here and we'll see what's happened to the environment in terms of the companies that exist there. So again, we talk about being cost competitive, we talk about manufacturing good products, but we tend to ignore or come up with quality products, or are the two incompatible?
May I start here? Because it connects with the last point I was making. And my point was that there is nothing like low cost. Because if your Excel sheets don't have the cost of environment in them, because it's only for 5 years, when you plan for 20 years, the cost will come. There's nothing like cheap. Either mother pays or you pay, or the consumer pays. Somebody is paying. Now the question comes back, and I think I'll connect to this point, is who is responsible? And I wanted to ask this question to everybody who has made many of these regulatory assumptions and strategies. The implementation, even if we agree one quality for one product, you take FDA standard or even better, whatever is the best, are you able to implement that? Because I think the right point here is, are we training those people who are actually going to be responsible for taking those decisions? Do we have enough people there on the ground to take their responsibility and say, look, strategy must have said something, but we have done it, we know what we are doing. And that's a deviation I would like to know about your experience.
If there's nobody again, I can.
Yes.
There are clear guidelines on the EHS also. Luckily for the biologics manufacturing doesn't generate that kind of a harmful waste except for the large volume of the.
Sorry,
Well, from an industrial biotechnology point of view, what we have experienced about 30 years now is very difficult. It was very difficult for us to talk about sustainable solutions. It was very difficult to talk about eco-friendly solutions. Most of the application of enzymes was adopted in India more out of international demand. Let me tell you all this again. For example, the leather exports, if you look at it, the exporters very clearly said that if you're going to do acid painting or if you're going to do harsh chemicals, we are not backing. So they were enforced. Same way, the poultry industry in India never believed in an enzyme 5 days. Elsewhere in the world, it was a regulation of the phosphorus emission in the environment. When we went ahead and spoke to all the farmers and big poultry farmers, some of them said that who's bothered about bird shit? India has enough of space for the phosphorus emission from the bird. But what made them use phytase was a mad cow disease, where the gelatin manufacturer stopped, no exports. Dicalcium phosphate, which was a byproduct of gelatin, was not available. They ran back to us. Today, a market which we started about 10 or 15 crores is 300 crores today. Phytase. Almost 90% of the farmers' poultry industry is using enzymes. Likewise, in Delhi, most of you have seen all those jeans washing laundries. They were all in between households where the bleach, the indigo dye coming out was running in every drainage there. And then later, there was an enforcement where Delhi, in India, it was always very difficult. We are ready to go for a cheaper alternative unless somebody tells them the farmers want biological solutions. Poultry farmers, in fact, asked us how does this 250 grams of enzymes are acting vis-a-vis 10 kg of dicalcium phosphate. What is this miracle? That's the level with which one has to teach, and that's what will make a difference if you talk makes a big difference.
This is a good segue to move to the next element. Is in terms of we talked about a minute earlier, what is our competitive advantage, on what basis are we competing? Could we therefore then say that our products are manufactured in an environment that's eco-friendly, quality that meets global standards, and does that become for example, a country like Italy, it's counterintuitive, but you look at the API manufacturers in Italy, they are equally competitive with manufacturers both. So much of data on private equity investing in API manufacturing in Italian companies. So is this something that we can also put forth, saying that products manufactured by manufacturers in India meet the best standards? Can we then make it come out of just the cost benefit that we offer? You are setting up a large CDMO, and CDMO, getting the COGS manufactured at the cheapest cost is one of the drivers. So is this going to be cost, quality, and environment for you, Dr. Vaikan?
I mean, most of the major big pharma, even in the incidents, they wanted to have a business continuity. They boils down to that. And a lot of markets are the tender-based government innovator there. When I travel outside, people always ask me, can you bring me the aspirin C from a particular manufacturer? Even the pharma guy who works in the major company, they ask, this is old mindset. But at least if I am actually working in a company, I should be confident about taking the thing. Can you take that medication? If I say confidently, yes, that means that you are matching everything. I think today our intent is very clear. The big pharma we are trying to get.
Please.
So I think the earlier actually the mindset
of and rather than the tyranny of or. So and can exist. My good friend Jitendra has. Yeah, please.
Look, we are all talking about quality. Sure enough, quality has to be good. But then let us look at the regulatory system. Today, WHO does not recognize our so-called biosimilars. They call them similar biologics simply because they are not comparative to any of the reference products. There is a case which Roche has filed against two so-called biosimilar products saying that you are telling the CSO that you cannot have this as biosimilar because they do not match the structural part of it. So that's where we need to harmonize our and secondly, like Dr. Sardana also mentioned, the objective of any regulatory system primarily is to see that the product does no harm. quality and efficacy follows that. So that is why you see in the US FDA product, the leaflet, the product information runs into pages. And the first thing they do is to highlight the adverse events or what can go wrong while having the product. I just wanted to add that.
Good points.
Just one more.
The one closest to the mic wins.
I think in line with Ritesh, I just want to add that one thing that we talk about, finding that India advantage with respect to cost is the labor cost. Right? So most of the operation we try to do in manual. And if you see the deviation analysis, okay, we have plenty of human errors that comes up. Another reason is that our automation support system is not very strong in India. I think if we automate and reduce the manual, it will have a lot of impact with respect to the cost. So you invest initially, have proper support of automation, and then run your process.
Dr. Venkat, you want
those are the connection. I was part of the some of the initial development with the company. They went ahead, quickly launched that product in India. Roche came very heavily after that. There's a lot of discussions happened. We put a lot of resistance. We showed that how that is not very different. But the same company, they went ahead, developed the reprocess. And then they have a process now. They completed a trial with the US FDA. They had a positive opinion on that. So one important thing here is they lost a lot of time there. If they done the right first time, this particular
the government behind his back. So, this is a good time to talk about. We did talk about the role of regulators. Also, we look at regulators only as enforcers. So when we move into the area, can the regulator also incentivize good behavior? Is something that we can look at. And this has actually been tried by one of the governments. They did it, of course, for taxes. They said if you pay your taxes in, earlier on, you get a 10% discount. Similarly, we have the regulator who at times comes late or doesn't come at all, or comes with a very heavy fine. So how can the regulator play a role? And I know you're not necessarily you're a facilitator. Let me make that very clear. But what's the role, therefore, that the government can play in incentivizing good behavior rather than disincentivizing it by, promising you a government accommodation in prison? It's already incentivized. They don't come to you if they don't have access. Rather than next they come to you, then you have to take care of it. It's already incentivized.
To be fair, incentivization, behavior and all will come later. But first of all, we have to incentivize the startups who are waiting for a facility to scale up their product. So from that perspective, I can talk. And we have some project, biomanufacturing project that DBT is very keen on that. We have floated the expression of interest. I'll talk about that a little bit and see your guidance and your interest level in that. Although the expression of interest date is over, but still, if I get some very strong inputs and desire, we can always assumption supported by a lot of facts is that the startups are stuck at the point where proof of concept and they are not able to scale up. So either it is whether it's microbial manufacturing or mammalian or GMP or anything you talk about, they are stuck because these facilities are not accessible to them. There may be some facilities available in different industries, but startups may not afford them. It may not be accessible to them. So how to actually get out of this situation? Because if innovation has to grow in this country, in our country, we have to actually see that the startup's journey is not blocked at a certain point. And what for 10 years, more than 10 years, 15 years of innovation revolution in bio that we are talking about has led to a lot of startups. Now we are talking about 6,000 startups. Many of them are stuck at this scale up level. How do we solve this problem? So government has come up with a solution that can we incentivize bigger companies to set up a manufacturing unit. They do their own biomanufacturing
but at the same time, they create something for the startup also because we are incentivizing. That is one aspect. It could be a greenfield project where we provide, for example, land and some cold shell, etc. And the bigger companies come and populate them and create some the operations of this pilot scale have to be done by the expertise drawn from the bigger company's experience. And that is how we want to make sure that also it will create a platform for industry startup collaboration, exchange of ideas, strategic partnership that we are missing in our country. We can only talk about few, maybe 3-4, to my knowledge, prominent startup bigger industry interaction, or which has resulted in a positive collaboration. One could be Turkey, now with Living Biotech, Embark is trying to acquire that, and maybe a few more, but it's not sufficient, especially because the venture capital environment in India is not so mature. The corporate side has to take up that. I think that would be a good solution for this startup. So greenfield projects could be one. The other could be existing facilities that as a pilot scale in that. Would you be happy to let startups use that? That could be one part of augmentation, or one part where you can create. The other are subsidize that cost. There are multiple permutation and combinations, and I think that would also help you get the catchment area of the startups and innovation. Suppose in your area you want certain startups to be looking at for strategic collaboration, that could be a good platform. Because many, at least in IT, we know that Microsoft Innovation Center, Johnson & Johnson, and all, what they are trying to do, trying to create a good pipeline of innovations. This may not be exactly what I am talking about, but at least it will create a platform. And government is very keen and ready to support this whole endeavor, which will take our country to the next level. So this is what I have to say about the government side. Excellent.
I have a point to make. Yeah, I have a point to make. Here.
Sorry. Yeah.
So it is, you are trying to tell that additional incubators, either with big industries or something has to be created, and there is sort of incentive to work for all pending startups. I have one issue, that is, what the rules say now is, because of that also, we started in a small 1,000 feet square feet area. All of the proof of concept is over, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is over. But now I have to create a bigger facility and again I have to do the clinical trials. But I am creating outside. This is what is also in a hitch.
Yes, that's excellent. Just to when we talk about startups, and we're very fashionable to talk about startups, but we shouldn't forget that startups is just nothing but a young enterprise. And like every other enterprise, all the regulations, you can't give a concession on quality to just because I'm, new or young or starting up, and when I grow up, I'll start behaving well. So this is something that we have to bear in mind. It has to come from the beginning. It's not something that we can do a catch up on at a later stage in our lives. But coming, to where we've shifted gears to incentivizing. Now, incentives could be of different kinds, right? One, of course, regulatory support, concessions in registrations. There could be tax breaks, grants, funds given for CGIP. There could also be a certification or a label that this product has come from a facility where the quality, it's responsibly manufactured, the quality is guaranteed. This comes from, you can create what kind of certificate or label you want. And also to a certain extent where I think on the consumer side, we have created awareness of quality products that we consume. A similar kind of awareness in terms of where that product is emanating from. Ultimately, it has to come from a sense of pride emanating from the manufacturer itself. So how can we, then build it that it becomes, I can't resist using this cliche, part of our DNA.
What already we are doing, the government and the PLI schemes, product link incentives, where you're doing responsible manufacturing in the sense that whatever this area or the critical area that you're looking into, okay, you are manufacturing something, so you get incentivized once you on your sales or whatever. That is one. Second thing is that, like if you talk about the COVID scenario, so we had a very crisis situation, and the companies who have taken this responsibility of manufacturing COVID vaccine, government has incentivized them, quite significantly. So that is BIOLAB responsible for that one. So I think these schemes are already existing. I mean, that's what. But moving forward, as you have mentioned, the PLI is the one which is coming from the government side that can be considered.
So PLI, I think, and I'm happy to be corrected. PLI was, a scheme directed to meet certain shortages that the government saw, and where we are largely import dependent. But what we are talking about is overall raising our standards, incentivizing us to be manufacturers of a standard that is globally uplifted. Wow, this is a product. I can be rest assured if that product carries this label or carries this certificate. How do we get to that stage? What kind of drivers, motivation required to reach there is what we are discussing at this point.
So I think there is two interchangeable biologics innately, and I think they get a year or exclusivity or something like that. If you get 1 year exclusivity on these kind of products and you have a sales, that's a good head start for someone, and that's a good incentive if they are ready with everything. That just one experiment has been done in the US. Yeah.
So, going back to many decades ago in an organization that I worked at, suddenly the tagline was changed one day to quality in everything we do. And what happened was in every, PowerPoint presentation also you made, when you have that tagline, you check the figures twice. Because when you're sitting in front of a client and your tagline says quality in everything that we do, and the numbers don't add up, you've got a sorry figure. So maybe a simple thing like that, which changed the mindset that, when I'm sending out a deliverable, it says this and doesn't match. So this is a very, it costs the company nothing to do that. So how can we do that? We take innate pride, we take immense pride in everything that we do. There is no inferior quality, this is always the best quality. Yes, Ramesh.
Celebrate GFP Day every day.
Right. Good point. Yes, sir.
While doing licensing out, bigger pharmaceutical companies always look at how the quality of the product is made, how eco-friendly the material was made. And that actually is indirectly incentivizing, because if your quality is so good and if you are taking care of all the social impact and everything else, we always advise companies who are following the rules and regulations.
Sure. Satya, I hope the X stands for experience.
Yes, expertise.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
My opinion is not with any company or organization that I work with. Okay. I think one thing from the startup side, it would be great to hear Vaibhav and others here, and including Nageshwar and others. One, and I agree with what you said exactly. All startups that we fund, we want them to be big, right? But at the government level, there is somehow little hesitation to interact with big companies. Right? So I see that kind of a contradictory. In tiny startups, we want them to be really big. When they become big, all of a sudden we think, oh, they will be big. Right? So that's the mindset we have to change. And Atul is smiling. Second is platforms like IKP, they have regulatory arm, the Nature Center, and others have that. And this is really at the stage when they are coming very pinky-eyed that we will do it and take it to the market in 18 months flat. Right? I think that big program needs overhaul. If I say that, being the progenitor as well, but it needs an overhaul from a variety of things. And I do a very early stage
innovation. And you've got to really start looking at what you are starting to fund, because 50 lakhs was 10 years back. Even at inflation, you know what. So you've got to, and that's also to Manish. Last year I was on a US program, and I was also working with an organization out of UK, and they asked me to look at diagnostic. We got, I said, okay, 8 million longitude prize. Is that be enough? Is that good? He said, well, longitude prize is a good label to have, great. But big, small, tiny, micro, will compare with that kind of funding, right? So it's even NBM. I think the kind of money is needed is different. And because what you said, I completely agree. Regulation as a tool for competitive advantage is important, and quality has to be the biggest one. So the morning question, Ranjit said, very nice, patient as a center. Do no harm. Do no harm to patient. If you read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, do no harm to environment. They are linked in some. How do you incentivize it? I think you've got to. I mean, US, the country that we think is the mecca of private enterprise. The role of the government is just mind. You say that. I was in UPenn in Philly. There's a Navy yard, 1,200 acres, but the government of Massachusetts has given it for $1 or something, some sort of prices, to build biomanufacturing. So I think, I don't know, there's deeper issues. We won't have time for incentivization discussion here.
But Satya, I can't resist saying this. You're sitting here in Genome Valley, the government of Andhra Pradesh has also given this entire area.
Yeah, so that's a good point. My last intervention would be that, we're talking about either as a company, but the whole ecosystem of supply chain. We don't have companies that make the best roads, the best cell lines, the best materials. We don't have companies thinking through, what's that English word? Obsolescence, right? Death of the product, packaging, right? All of that has to be thought through in thinking about quote unquote responsible manufacturing. So where is our network of companies that supply the best molecule food? I don't think we have it yet. Vaibhav can give you a good answer to that, right? So to Jitendra's headache, let's add two more. Right? Is it doable? I think it is doable.
It's a collective headache. And
it's amazing what government can do to you in 3 months.
Government all the time.
Yes.
In one form or the other. But I think, when we are talking about incentivizing through funding, startup is one we can always take an excuse. Okay, we have to spur innovation in our country. We can do. But when we are talking about funding the bigger company, you said no that when they become bigger, we don't talk to them. We don't talk to them only from the funding perspective.
No, but that's not the one. So that's why.
In the interest of giving other people.
Just to counter that, it's not to counter that. It's, do you think the biggest of the big companies, Genentech, Amgen, J&J, Medtronic, Danaher, take access to incentivization by the government? The answer is yes.
So I will just take a minute to.
Sure. And then we have you, sir.
But my dear friends.
Jitendra has to catch it.
Let's
not forget that.
So I take this a minute to just rebut my dear friend Satya regarding incentivization. The HPV vaccine story.
Yes.
It started with a VAP program, went to DBT for the big program initially when it was with BioRack. Then it came to Grand Challenges India, and under BioRack we funded Serum Institute of India. The idea was to bring the 9,000 rupees per dose vaccine to 300 rupees per dose vaccine for India. That's how we work with Serum Institute of India and literally incentivize that vaccine, which is now getting into the national immunization.
So we work with Serum Institute of India and institutionalize such a way that the vaccine is available now 300 rupees.
That is wonderful. What I am saying is not a small
yeah, so COVID vaccine also played that role.
No, it's a small point, but see,